We will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Budget Responsibility Bill Committee.
No.
Order. Order.
Budget Responsibility Bill.
I remind members that in committee, members should not address the Chair as Deputy Speaker. Please use our names when addressing the Chair, Madam Chair or Chair. We begin with Amendment 9 to Clause 1, with which it will be convenient to consider all other amendments selected and the clauses to the bill. I now call the Shadow Minister, Nigel Huddleston, to move Amendment 9.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and can I first take the opportunity to congratulate you on your election. I promise, I'm going to promise to try not to try your patience over the coming weeks, years and so on, but we'll see how things go. Now, I wish to primarily speak today to the Opposition Amendment 9 and, of course, consequential Amendment 10, which effectively seeks to ensure that the fiscal lock proposed in this bill should also include any changes to the fiscal rules and would require the Office for Budget Responsibility to produce a report on their effect on public finances. The Office for Budget Responsibility was, of course, constructed by a Conservative Chancellor following the poor forecasting record of the previous Labour government. Between 2000 and 2010, the then Labour government's forecast for economic growth were out by an average of £13 billion, and their forecast for the budget deficit 3 years ahead were out by an average of £40 billion. Their forecast therefore lacked credibility, and to re-establish confidence and credibility, the OBR was created by the then Conservative government. But while Labour lacked economic credibility in the past, I'm afraid they still lack it now. The facts simply do not stack up to the false claim that they have inherited the worst economic circumstances since the Second World War. They transparently have not. Contrary to the rewriting of history that the current Labour government are attempting, when we took over from Labour back in 2010, inflation was 3.4%, whereas when they took over from us, it was 2.2%. The annual deficit is half what we inherited in 2010. Unemployment is about half now than what it was in 2010. And we handed Labour the fastest economic growth in the G7. The dominant political and economic narrative since the Second World War is, in fact, as has been widely commented on, that every single Labour government ends up with unemployment higher at the end of their time in power than when they took over from the Conservatives preceding them. The British public should not be taken for fools. Just because Labour keep claiming something, it doesn't mean it suddenly becomes true, which is why clarity over plans and rules are so important. The fiscal rules are, of course, restrictions on fiscal policy set by the government to constrain its own decisions on spending and taxes. The fiscal rules set by the previous government said that the debt to GDP ratio should be falling within a 5-year horizon, and the ratio of the annual budget deficit to GDP should be below 3% by the end of the same period. Labour's manifesto for the election proposed the following fiscal rules: balancing the current budget so that day-to-day costs are met by revenues, and debt must be falling as a share of the economy by the 5th year of the forecast. So, on the surface, the debt rules appear to be broadly the same under the new government. The government has even said it has an ironclad commitment to reduce government debt. It is therefore of critical importance what definition of debt is used for the fiscal rules. And clearly, any changes to the fiscal rules are financially significant decisions because they affect how much the government can borrow and spend. At second reading, the Exchequer Secretary to the Treasury said our fiscal rules are non-negotiable. Great. But why then has the Chancellor repeatedly failed to rule out that she will change the definition of debt in her fiscal rules to allow presumably massive borrowing? The government cannot run from the scrutiny that they should be subjected to if they're considering making such a change. we believe our amendment requiring an OBR report on changes to the fiscal rules is entirely consistent with the government's stated policy intent and should, therefore, be a fairly uncontentious amendment. After all, at second reading, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury said, and I quote, "The announcement of a fiscally significant measure should always be accompanied by an independent assessment of its economic impact and fiscal implications in order to support transparency and accountability." End quote. Well, we agree, and clearly not accepting our amendment would be contrary to these goals, because clearly changing the fiscal rules would be a fiscally significant measure in anybody's books. Furthermore, the Chief Secretary said that fiscal discipline and sound money is the bedrock of our plans. Well, changing the fiscal rules would be changing the foundations, would be changing that bedrock. Transparency and clarity is important in relation to public finances, because ministers should never forget it is not their money they are spending, it's the public's money. The public have a right to know how their money is being spent, and government is about making difficult choices with limited resources. The British public recognise that with government spending above £1.2 trillion per year, the government clearly does have choices. It is not an endless supply of money, but it is a very, very large amount. And in the last few weeks, the new Labour government chose to spend the public's money on pay settlements for their union friends rather than spend money supporting pensioners. This is estimated to cost about £10 billion. They also chose to spend £8.3 billion on a public energy company, £7.3 billion on a national wealth fund. So far from inheriting a £22 billion black hole, they actually just spent £25 billion creating one within the first few weeks of coming to power.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and he's making a fantastic speech on the importance of the responsibility of our public finances. Much of this bill is concerned with responsibility and transparency. I don't know if my honourable friend knows, but did the government publish an impact assessment when it took away the winter fuel allowance?
Yes, I thank my honourable friend for making that point. My understanding is that they have not published an impact assessment, and would normally be the case for something with such a significant impact. And I think this speaks to the whole narrative we're hearing from the opposition, claiming one thing, but actually, in fact, the facts speak differently. As I said, so far from inheriting a £22 billion black hole, they've actually spent, or committed to spending, an additional £25 billion. That is a choice that they made. So the claim that the Labour government are having to take winter fuel allowances away from millions of pensioners is a response to unexpected financial constraints just simply does not stack up with the facts, or indeed the words of the Chancellor herself, who on the 25th of March 2014, yes, a decade ago, said, quote, "We are the party who have said that we will cut the winter fuel allowance for the richest pensioners and means test that benefit to save money," end quote. That's a direct quote in Hansard from the current Chancellor. So no, their restricting of winter fuel payments is not a response to financial circumstance. It's a long-established, clearly stated Labour policy intent, a deliberate policy choice, but a policy that they conveniently forgot to tell the public about in the run-up to the last election. But I hope that the government can be straight with the public on this point about the fiscal rules, accept the amendment that we are proposing, and provide the assurance to all members and the outside world that there is no sleight of hand here, that the bill they propose will work as they say it is intended, and will include financially significant decisions, such as on the levels of government borrowing, on the fiscal rules. I would appreciate it, therefore, if the Minister could confirm in their wind-up that the government does not intend to change the definition of debt in their fiscal rules, does not intend to practice some accounting trick to hide the level of government borrowing, and confirm that the government does indeed wish to be clear and transparent about the public finances. If the Labour Party vote against our amendment, it will merely prove that they are planning to change their fiscal rules at the budget, to borrow more money, increase debt, and run away from independent OBR scrutiny, the very opposite of the stated intent of this bill. Thank you.
Marvellous. We come to our first maiden speech. Dr. Oh, my, forgive me. The question is that Amendment 9 to Clause 1 be made. What is that? Perfect. Now, we will now move on to more substantial contributions, and I go to the first maiden speech. Dr. Jeevun Sandher.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing me to rise and give my maiden speech in this House. Like every member across this House, it is the greatest honour, privilege and responsibility of my lifetime to represent my community of Loughborough, Shepshed and the villages. But I rise at this, the most difficult moment for our communities, for our country, since the Second World War, when many feel despondency, despair and anger. Now, I know that every member across this House wants our communities to succeed, to contribute to our national success. It is what my community has done before and will do again, with hope and determination. Now, my story does not begin in Loughborough. I was not born there, but it is where my friends, who are now my neighbours, who have made it my home. My story, instead, begins in rural Punjab, 4,000 miles away, where my father was born almost 70 years ago, where his chances of dying before his 5th birthday were 1 in 4. Today, a child born in the same place is around 9 times less likely to die. That is what economic growth means. It means less suffering, it means less misery, it means less death. That's why I became an economist, to build prosperity and to lessen misery. I learnt my trade in the Treasury, and I then went to work in Somaliland, one of the poorest nations on earth, where I helped write their economic policy, their budget and their national development plan. But it's also where I saw the horrors of climate change lead to drought, hunger and death. But it is where I learned that even in the darkest of hours and the most difficult of moments, we can build prosperity. And now I stand here as the elected Member of Parliament for my community. And it says something remarkable about our nation, that the fact that I, as the son of immigrants, am standing here is in and of itself unremarkable. It speaks to our common culture, a culture forged of different backgrounds, a culture that not only rejects the violence we saw over the summer, but completely rejects its reasoning too. My election represents an historic first for my community. I am a member of an underrepresented minority. I am, of course, the first Member of Parliament elected by the men and women of Loughborough that has a beard. And to the organisers of the Beard of the Year competition, call me. Luckily for me, my dad is not eligible for that particular competition. And I know that the Right Honourable Member for Islington North has won the award several times. I hope he doesn't mind me winning the prize this time, as long as I let him win the argument. My predecessor in this place, Jane Hunt, was not a contender for this award, but no one can doubt her commitment to Team Loughborough, and every single member across this House and across my community wishes her the very best, especially as she has recovered from cancer. Her predecessor, the Baroness Morgan, has talents that are well known both in this and the other place. And before her, my good friend and mentor, Andy Reid. For those members who know Andy, they know that he is still a leading figure of sports policy. And they will also know that Andy is the nicest man in British politics. It is his character that I hope to live up to in this place. But I do rise, Madam Chair, at what is the most difficult time for our communities and our nation since 1945. Our communities are in crisis. Wages in my constituency, £10,000 lower than had we grown at new Labour rates. The divides caused by deindustrialisation have widened from cracks into chasms. Young men who used to leave school and get good jobs are now 20% less likely to get any job. And in our most deprived neighbourhoods, life expectancy falling before the pandemic. But more than any fact, more than any figure, the despair, the despondency, the anger. And across and beyond our shores, war in Europe once more, democracy in danger. And most seriously of all, a planet that is burning. For my community, the hottest summer we have ever known, followed by the worst flooding we have ever seen that destroyed homes. Destruction the Prime Minister and I saw when we visited the homes of Ian and Alan. No one should wake up in the morning to find their home destroyed by flooding, and that will only become more common in the years ahead. What we do in the next decade will determine the fate of our communities, democracy, and our planet. We will either rise to this moment, build prosperity for all, protect democracy, and stop emitting carbon, or everything we hold dear will crumble and fall. Now, previous generations have shown us that we can rise to our moment, to this, a moment that threatens us. Our country stood alone against fascism in Europe and won. I think today of my constituent, David Williams, 104 years old, who flew Spitfires in the war. As that generation rose to their moment, so can we. And it is my community who has shown me that we can. When the waters came and the floods rose, my constituents, Kaz and Carl, did not stop and pause to think if they could help, but only how they could help. They organised collections, they provided refuge, they looked after perfect strangers, not asking if, but how. It is their spirit that I carry into this place, not asking if, but how. How can we build prosperity and protect our planet from burning? We can do so, Madam Chair, by investing in our green transition. That creates good jobs and gets wages rising for the people and places left behind when the factories closed. That is what we can achieve. And we are seeing it work already in the United States. In my community has world-leading hydrogen research and industry. Green hydrogen we need for fertilizer and to keep our trucks moving. It is not a coincidence that I have chosen to speak in this debate with Treasury ministers on the front bench. And I say to them, get out the chequebook. They're very excited by that. Because I will be asking for money from both the National Wealth Fund and GB Energy. But this is about more than cash. It is about rebuilding hope and prosperity. As a previous generation rose to their moment. In the midst of the most destructive war in the history of humankind, an economist wrote a report that still defines our nation. He wrote, freedom from want cannot be forced upon a democracy. It cannot be given to them. It must be won by them. And it was won by them. They built prosperity for all, with good jobs across our country, education for all, housing for all, healthcare for all. As that generation rose to their moment, so will we. by building prosperity, protecting our planet, and ending despair and despondency. As previous generations rose to their moment, so we will too, with the hope and determination that defines our communities, that defines our country. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Indeed. Very strong maiden speech without a script in hand. Your parents will be proud. Andrew Griffith.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it's a delight as ever to serve under your chairmanship. I'd like to congratulate the new member for Loughborough on his maiden speech, his kind comments about his predecessor, Jane Hunt, a great colleague of this House, and it was one of my great pleasures in my previous role as Minister for Science and Research to visit the fine university that he now represents. I wish him and they well, and I wish him all the very luck with his front bench in procuring the financial support that he seeks. Madam Deputy Chairman, this is a disreputable bill, if we're brutally honest, and it's a piece of political theatre that all of us in this House, on both sides, should think very strongly about giving our support to. The history of this place is of legislation made in haste, about which this House subsequently repents in leisure. And I say in all seriousness and in the spirit of this place, that at a time when there is a low trust in politics, do our constituents, the honourable members' constituents, when they trooped into the ballot box and returned him to this place only weeks ago, do they seriously expect that our role is to give away even more of our responsibilities? Do our constituents, can any of us hand on heart say our constituents know what and who the OBR are? Do the electors of Bristol North West, Hampstead and Highgate, Richmond Park, or indeed Arundel and South Downs send us here to this place only to give away our duties and responsibility to unnamed, unknown, unelected officials, well-meaning no doubt, of the Office of Budget Responsibility? Madam Deputy Chairman, hands on the face of a stopped clock are sometimes more accurate than the OBR forecasts, as at least they are correct, for sure, twice a day. And in truth, this legislation put together at breakneck speed has more holes than a Swiss cheese. If you look at clause 1, paragraph subsection 3, who is it that decides the costing that is referred to in that clause? In clause 4A, this exempts any measure that is intended at its time of introduction to be temporary. Well, members of this House will be familiar with the fact that income tax itself, one of the largest ever fiscal measures, was itself intended to be temporary. Perhaps the front bench would address that fact when they seek to address this bill. Income tax was, of course, introduced by Pitt the Younger in 1799 as a temporary measure. Well, here we are 225 years later, and that temporary measure, I have to say, is still going extremely strong. And who defines what is and what is not a fiscal measure? A measure potentially impacting the GDP of this country. Well, many things in this House will have a direct impact or an indirect impact on the GDP of this country. The decision by Tony Blair to take us to war without a vote in this House undoubtedly impacts on the GDP of this economy. Decisions, if this House choose to make them as is its right, to introduce a 4-day working week, would have a material impact on GDP of this country. The Centre for Business Economics and Research estimate that every bank holiday costs this country $3.6 billion, approaching up to $3.6 billion. Now, 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 bank holidays later, and you're queuing up to a 1% impact on GDP, which I speculate may be the threshold for the OBR to intervene. Trade deals, if the if the government benches, if the government benches fulfilled their ambition to realign with Europe, to federate and once again abrogate our trade to Europe. Now, unquestionably, that would be something that would potentially have a material fiscal impact on GDP. So there are very few domains of this House, very few of the decisions that our constituents have sent us here to litigate and decide on their behalf that would not potentially fall foul of this rule. And leaders, I'd be very happy to give way. It's always a pleasure.
I'm going to delight him because I'm sure he saw on the amendment paper I have indeed tabled an amendment that would look at trade deals. And one of the reasons I felt compelled to do this and explore this question that he is raising about the economic impact is the very trade deals he's talking about. Whilst he was in government and indeed a Treasury Minister, the government didn't publish any information. Now, I will always welcome a sinner who repenteth. But is he saying, for avoidance of doubts, he does now believe there should be independent scrutiny of things like the Trade and Cooperation Agreement?
I thank you, Honourable Lady, and it's good that we have a proper debate such as this. I certainly think that if we want and seek good government, and that, like the human condition, is not a perfect state, but it is a state that we should seek constantly to perfect, then the highest levels of transparency and the very, very important exercise in the government publishing, as it's required to by Cabinet Office guidance, impact assessments when it makes material decisions, are something that the whole House should join hands and agree on. It's one of the reasons why I asked my colleague whether the government had indeed published an impact assessment on its callous decision to withdraw the winter fuel allowance from so many pensioners. The Honourable Lady will well know that the process of trade deals does undergo extensive scrutiny in this House, and I myself took one of those trade deals through that process of scrutiny in a former life. But my point is, and I will conclude because I simply want to alert honourable members to what they are potentially doing as they seek to support this bill. It's not something for partisan or political advantage, but it's something about the important role of Parliament that has been litigated many, many times in this chamber and debate. I'd delight to give way.
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman, and unsurprisingly, I've listened to his speeches on a number of occasions. I agree with quite a lot of what he's saying about transparency. But does he agree with me that the burden of the points he is making is that you can't make a government behave better or govern more effectively by quangos, and that this quango was set up by George Osborne to trap an incoming Labour government and restrict it and slow it down. And it's an odd thing that we see this quango being gilded.
Well, the Honourable Member for Blakely makes, as ever, an important and weighty contribution. And I think he's exactly right in terms of the direction of travel. Now, we will all, on both sides, find our own particular point on the envelope in terms of the balance between organisations that can hold us to account. Organisations in particular that hold a mirror to government and ensure that this House acts with the best and most accurate and well-meaning data. But he's also right, and my core point about this is that we are sent here by our constituents. Again, I congratulate the member for Loughborough, who's been sent here on behalf of his constituents, given a fine speech today. But I don't believe, and he may intervene and correct me, but I don't believe that the citizens of Loughborough, whether they voted for Jane Hunt or for our new colleague in this place, intended that one of the very first actions that he and we would do as legislators here today would be to award more of our powers, place more fetters upon ourselves. This is the right chamber for accountability. We should hold ourselves to account. We have a number of ways in which to do that to ourselves. And there's a very real issue about what the Honourable Member talks about, quangos, arm's length bodies, and how we hold ourselves to account. That, Madam Deputy Speaker, is my point. I understand there are many colleagues who wish to get in today. I support the amendment put forward by my honourable friend because, again, it's quite right that we have the rules. I was an accountant by training, and the first thing you learn, whether it's in accountant or performance sport, is you play by the rules as they are. You don't seek to rig the rules in your favour. Thank you very much.
Creasy. Thank you, Madam Chair. And it is a pleasure to be speaking in the same session as the maiden speech that's been given by the member for Loughborough, and I'm sure there are others coming as well that will show just how impressive the new generation of MPs are, I'm sure, across the House. It's also a joy to follow the member from Arundel and South Downs, because I've always enjoyed the experience of listening to him as a former Treasury Minister in the previous government. I watched him, debated with him, tried to encourage him to take on the buy now, pay later lenders. That is current to what I will speak to today about legal loan sharking. But I have to be honest, being lectured by former Conservative ministers about fiscal probity is a bit like being lectured by Toad of Toad Hall about safe driving, given the experiences of many of our constituents that have led to the need for this legislation. So let me start by putting on record my support for this legislation, because anybody, frankly, who's had to renegotiate a budget, a mortgage since the Liz Truss budget knows exactly why it is needed and exactly why we must protect the British public from the consequences of bad decision-making at a national level, because we saw so many examples of it under the previous administration that they have paid the price for and will continue to pay. Of course I will let them intervene. I could
Grateful for the honourable member for Walthamstow. But of course, what this legislation does not do is fetter the last government, previous governments. What this legislation would do is fetter the discretion of her own front bench. And in that context, does she not perhaps enjoy the confidence in her own front bench that many others seem to?
A bit disappointed there that the member didn't seek to call me ratty. But I'm also quite struck by the fact that a former Conservative Treasury Minister is getting up, not seeking to hold himself accountable for the consequences of decisions made by the previous government, or indeed defend them, but simply saying, well, you're going to be held to a higher fiscal standard. I think we welcome a higher fiscal standard on this side. That is the purpose of this legislation, because political decisions will still be made, but we will make them with the benefit of independent information. And he will know there were many debates in the previous Parliament, indeed previous before that, where independent information verification about the economic impact of policies mattered and was missing. And indeed, he raised trade deals. That's exactly an example of one where we didn't have independent information. I will briefly comment on that, because I do know that my amendment has not been selected. I know the member for Arundel will be as disappointed as I am. The amendments that I have put forward are intended to probe this legislation and this concept of fiscally significant. So amendments 6 and 7, and indeed 8, although it was not selected and seen as within scope, are about this question of how do we hold ourselves to account for the impact for future generation. I am not here to make a maiden speech. I am essentially the old guard now, because I've been here for 14 years. I know it's very sad, remember. Everyone was looking at me with horror. Yes. But in that time, many of us have had persistent concerns, and one of my concerns has always been the private finance initiative. This government is asking all of us to make some very tough decisions and support some very tough decisions because of the economic mess this country now finds itself in. It is my view that we must look at all outgoings in that process. And the challenge with private finance is just as if somebody came to your constituency surgery and they had multiple outstanding loans and they could not pay their rent. You would seek to look at the debts that they held. So private finance is the legal loan sharking of the public sector. And my amendments 6 and 7 are about that process of getting a grip on the debts that we have and making sure moving forward we learn from the damage that private finance has done. Let us be very clear, nobody can absolve themselves from private finance. Governments of all persuasions have sought to use this process. The ability to put only the repayments rather than the substantial cost of borrowing on the books. Started under John Major. Yes, multiple PFIs under the previous but one Labour government, and indeed the previous Conservative government continued to use private finance up until 2018. That is why, as of February this year, there are still 700 PFI schemes which represent a capital value of £57 billion, but for which we will pay back £151 billion in the years ahead. When we are asking pensioners to pay more for heating their homes, we should be asking how we can pay less for the private finance debts that we have built up. Private finance was about being able to build things like schools and hospitals, and anybody who knows in their constituency whether they have an outstanding PFI debt or indeed has a school or a hospital, as I do, with Whipscross Hospital that urgently needs rebuilding, the importance of being able to access private finance. So let me say, for avoidance of doubt, I am not here with amendments to say that we should never work with the private sector to raise finance. I am here to say that PFI was catastrophically a bad deal, and that cumulatively it would meet the targets in this legislation about 1% of GDPR. And so I see GDP rather, and so I see this as a fiscally significant policy. The amendments I've put down, therefore, are about trying to understand how we will deal with cumulative debt and cumulatively fiscally significant policies.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend and agree with her completely on the points that she's making as a sort of member of the even older guard than
the original, the OG.
than she is. Certainly the old guard from the start of the last Labour government, which is relevant because at that time I had a discussion with the then Paymaster General, Geoffrey Robinson, about the costs of PFIs for hospital, and his answer was succinct. If you want the hospitals, then you have to go down the PFI rule. Why he was saying that was because the Treasury rules were so rigid in terms of finding money for socially needed hospitals in this case, that they had to work round them at the eventual huge cost to the taxpayer. And there is a warning there about rigid rules and not dealing with the reality.
He won't surprise I don't just agree with him on his football teams, but also on his analysis. Absolutely, this is about the fiscal rules, and this legislation is about having better fiscal rules and having tougher constraints on when governments make decisions, because as we saw with the Liz Truss budget, how catastrophic those decisions can be. PFI is something many people will have come across in their individual constituencies, but it's worth putting on the record just how big it is, because that is relevant in the context of this legislation. We're talking about 700 projects, but actually each project can be hundreds of individual buildings. So, for example, one of them is 80 schools alone, of those 700. So you can think about the scale that we're talking about. About half of it is held between the Department of Health and Department of Education. This is our schools and hospitals. This is how we built desperately needed schools and hospitals. But the cost is absolutely critical, because for some NHS trusts, the percentage of their total budget that they are now spending on repayments on PFI is 13%. For some, it's £2 billion a year. In practical terms, that means that some NHS trusts are spending more repaying what is essentially a payday loan for the public sector than they are what they're paying on drugs for their patients. It is a huge drain on our public finances. During the pandemic in 2020, Norfolk and Norwich University Hospital paid £66 million to service its PFI commitments. That is the same that it spent on lab equipment, surgical tools and PPE. UCLH Hospital has already paid out £200 million in dividends to the company that owns its PFI. So this is not just money going on repaying a debt for building a hospital. This is money going out in pure profit to these companies. That is why I draw the parallel to the payday lenders and indeed to the buy now, pay later companies. Because once you're hooked in, you have to keep paying the debt. It's not just within the NHS. Hanson School in Bradford has reached a debt of £4.16 million because of its PFI debt. It's now referred to as the UK's orphan school because nobody wants to run it or take it over because of its financial position that it's in. Liverpool City Council pay £4 million a year for Parklands High School, again built under PFI but no longer needed because of falling school rolls. They've roughly £42 million left to pay back on that contract for an empty, dead building. The Equity Solutions company which owns it has posted £340,000 of profit this year alone from that project. PFI companies have made £111 million in pre-tax profit from education profit projects alone. That's about £800,000 per project. That is the equivalent of 5,500 new teachers' salaries. The reality about this is that we don't let schools and hospitals go bust. So although these companies took on these deals to take on the risk of rebuilding your public infrastructure, the reality is they've taken on the ability to print money. And that is what these deals are doing. And I will wager every new MP and existing MP will have had a conversation with somebody in their local government, with somebody in a local hospital, or somebody in a local school who talks about the damage that PFI is doing to their budgets as if it is non-negotiable. These amendments today are about changing that culture. Because one of the challenges here is we've let these companies run rampant. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't work with the private sector. It does mean we should learn the lessons, and I think we can learn some very simple lessons. For a start, a lot of these companies are incorporated in overseas territories, which raises questions about the amount of tax that they are paying on these deals. These deals, that tax was part of the Treasury assessment originally as to why it was good value for money to work in this way, why my colleague was told that was the best way to get a school or hospital. Also, we could learn from payday lending in capping what these companies pay. After all, we cap the returns on defence projects. It makes no economic or ethical sense to say that we cap what you can earn from a military contract, but when you build a school and hospital, it's free rein. Above all, we need to know how much we owe, because even the major projects infrastructure within government could not get a grip on the total reality of our PFI commitments to date. Partly because this has been done at a local government level, it's been done through devolution, it's been done in silos in companies. So it seems a very simple thing to me, because even if these debts are being held overseas, the people paying them are very much here. Northampton, 42 schools costing £30 million per annum, including £4.2 million in pre-tax profits in 21-22. Northampton's budgets are in a very, very difficult position right now as a local authority, but the firm that owns all of those is based in Guernsey. In Birmingham, 11 schools, part of the Birmingham Schools Partnership, is owned by Innisfree. Innisfree owns 260 schools across this country. It also owns my local hospital in Whipps Cross, based in Jersey, making millions of pounds in profit from these deals. We've never consolidated these loans to ask ourselves whether we could renegotiate them as a country and therefore claw some money back, because we don't know who we owe what to or how much that's going to cost. Amendments 6 and 7 are about the challenges at the threshold this legislation poses, because it's absolutely right to set a threshold as to what is fiscally significant. And individual PFIs would not go anywhere near a threshold of 1% of GDP, which is about £28 billion. But when you add them up, it's very clear with what we know already about our PFI commitments that it does. So these amendments are intended to probe the government about how we deal with debts and spending that may not individually meet that threshold, but might do cumulatively, and to look at what we can do in the future to make sure if we do work with the private sector, and I'm here not saying that we should never do so, but I'm saying we should learn from PFI to make better decisions. Because after all, this legislation is about making better informed independent decisions. That is exactly why I also tabled Amendment 8 to learn the lessons again about trade deals, because the member opposite is right. The government's decision to go for the trade and cooperation agreement, the hardest of Brexit, has cost us, it's estimated, 4% of GDP. So again, it would be a fiscally significant decision. It would be as catastrophic as that Liz Truss budget. Indeed, many of us can see that it has been, but we did not have an independent assessment. Amendment 6 and 7.7 is an enabling amendment, would ensure that we had an independent assessment when it comes to cumulative spending, looking at these issues. I know the Minister is as interested as I am in what we can do to tackle the drain that PFI is and to work better with the private sector. I hope this legislation and that concept of putting PFI on the books is the start of a conversation about better public spending. And I hope that Toad of Toad Hall will recognise that maybe this time it's good they're in the passenger seat.
Sarah Olney, are you bobbing?
Into my amendments. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'll speak in favour of amendments 1 through 4 tabled in my name. Let me once again welcome this bill and the intent of this government to try and rebuild trust with the financial markets and across our economy as a whole. The Liberal Democrats are optimistic about the new government's stated commitment to building a strong platform for economic growth, particularly after years of Conservative turmoil. And I remain hopeful that this bill can support fiscal responsibility and transparency and help to prevent a repeat of the Conservatives' disastrous mini-budget. The amendments tabled in my name would strengthen the legislation so that this aim can be achieved. I'd like to take this moment to welcome the concern that the member for Arundel and South Downs has shown for my constituents in Richmond Park and what their thoughts about this particular legislation might be, but I wonder where his concern for my constituents was when the government that he was a part of cheered on, championed, voted for that disastrous mini-budget that so undermined our stable economy to the detriment of the well-being of our individuals, communities and businesses. Because Liberal Democrats understand how much our constituents have suffered from the increase in mortgage payments, higher fuel bills, escalating food prices. We understand the disastrous effects of the chaos and uncertainty wrought by the previous Conservative government in their horrendous mismanagement of the economy. And we know that the future prosperity can only be built upon a firm foundation. We know that the heavy burden our constituents continue to feel in their pockets and their personal finances, and we know that they deserve better. As I've previously acknowledged, the broad positive response this bill has evoked across the business and finance sector are indicative of the desire for stability, and we welcome the engagement from economists, such as the new member for Loughborough, indeed, and I wish him well in the Beard of the Year contest, and industry experts who advise of the beneficial impact of this bill on the confidence in the public finances. We've carefully scrutinised the details of the bill to make sure it will achieve its intended aims. In particular, we've looked closely at the threshold for fiscally significant measures, which will be set at 1% of GDP, or approximately £30 billion, and whether the proposed fiscal lock could be circumvented by governments announcing major changes that are just below the threshold. And whilst we understand that the bar has been set relatively high to prevent a large-scale, irresponsible fiscal event such as the disastrous mini-budget, we're aware of the limitations this places on the bill, and especially when it comes to measures that might have relatively small upfront costs to the government, but significant indirect fiscal or economic effects. I would therefore ask the Chancellor and the Treasury Ministers whether a GDP measure alone can adequately capture the impact of a spending or taxation measure on the economy, and whether the government should examine the possibility of using additional criteria when setting the threshold. And that's why I've tabled Amendment 1, which would broaden the definition of fiscally significant measures to include those which fall below the costing threshold, but could have wider fiscal and economic effects. The amendment would ensure that the OBR is able to produce a report when it judges that proposed measures are likely to affect interest rates, the cost of government borrowing, or economic growth. Whereas a fiscal lock based solely on GDP could leave open the possibility of circumvention, the wider definition would enable the OBR to step in if it thinks it likely that the government measures might precipitate the kind of economic disaster we saw after the mini-budget. It's possible to imagine a situation where a fiscal measure falls just short of the 1% of GDP threshold, but is nonetheless likely to carry significant ramifications for the cost of government borrowing, for economic growth, and crucially, for interest rates. And we can't forget that any spike in interest rates doesn't just carry grave consequences for the public finances. It also comes with a huge impact on household finances and people's living standards. We all witnessed mortgage rates skyrocket in the aftermath of the previous government's catastrophic mini-budget, and millions of families are still struggling with higher bills as a result. It's therefore wholly appropriate that interest rates are taken into consideration in assessing whether a measure is fiscally significant. This bill is an encouraging sign of this government's intention to act with more integrity and transparency than the last, but the provisions of this bill alone may not be enough to protect voters from the consequences of another disastrous mini-budget if a future Chancellor or Prime Minister are so minded to deliver one. That is why strengthening the fiscal lock by broadening the definition of fiscally significant measures is such a vital safeguard. I also wish to speak in favour of Amendment 2, And now this amendment would enable the OBR to notify the independent advisor on ministers' interests if they think that a failure to request a report ahead of a fiscal event might constitute a breach of the ministerial code. Now, the 2022 mini-budget was clearly the moment when the Conservative Party's carelessness took our country to the brink. However, we should not forget that it was in fact the culmination of years of mismanagement and disregard for the principles of good governance from a Conservative Party that considered itself to be above the rules. Sidelining the OBR ahead of a major fiscal event was the pinnacle of the arrogance we had seen so many times before. Now, the Ministerial Code puts in place guardrails that are crucial for good governance. It promotes essential principles such as transparency, accountability and openness, stating, for example, that ministers have a duty to be as open as possible with Parliament and the public. Now, these are principles that all governments should abide by, especially when they relate to economic matters, and the Liberal Democrats have long called for the Ministerial Code to be enshrined in legislation. In the same vein, this amendment would provide for useful scrutiny of the government's actions by empowering the OBR to notify the independent advisor on ministers' interests if they have reason to believe that vital principles of the code may have been violated. We must never again have a government put the country's finances at risk out of their disdain for the rules, and this amendment would help that. Finally, I wish to speak in favour of Amendments 3 and 4. The purpose of these amendments is to strengthen scrutiny of any changes to the Charter for Budget Responsibility in order to ensure that the provisions of this bill could not be circumvented simply by revising the threshold set out in the Charter. A full consultation, along with an extended period of scrutiny, would ensure that Parliament and the public are fully informed of and given the opportunity to engage with any proposed changes, improving transparency and accountability. Responsible public finances are essential for stability, certainty and confidence that drive economic growth and for getting mortgage rates under control. The Conservative government has shown all too clearly the damage and pain caused by fiscal irresponsibility. I therefore urge the House to accept these amendments. The Liberal Democrats want to see a thriving British economy, one that provides jobs and opportunities for working people and is attractive to businesses and investors. We believe that this bill is a significant step in promoting long-term stability, and we urge the government to accept our amendments, which would strengthen the legislation and help to create the conditions for responsible economic governance. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I thought I'd offer some tips to colleagues in the chamber. If you are bobbing, you will be called. If you're on the list but are not bobbing, you're indicating to the chair or the speaker you no longer wish to be called. So if you're hoping to be called, you bob throughout the debate. If you're on the list and committed to bobbing but you left the chamber, you are indicating to the chair or the speaker you no longer wish to be a priority on the list. But you can speak to the chair or the speaker and ask permission to leave and return, and you'll remain the priority number that you are on the list to begin with. So unless you are standing, I do not know whether you wish to contribute to the debate. So who wishes to bob? Amanda Martin, maiden speech.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And may I start by commending my honourable friends for their impassioned speeches, and particularly my honourable friend from Loughborough, who will be pleased to know that I won't be a contender in his competition this year. Menopause seeing maybe later. It's a huge honour to stand before you today as the newly elected Member of Parliament for Portsmouth North. This moment is not lost on me, as I am filled with immense emotion to represent the place where everyone I love lives. Portsmouth is a city rich in history, innovation and, most importantly, community spirit and pride. It's also a place of firsts. Throughout our city's storied history, we have been pioneers in many fields, whether that be shipbuilding, maritime trade or cultural advancement. Portsmouth has always led the way, and it is this spirit of innovation that I intend to champion whilst in this House. I am also deeply humbled to be doing my maiden speech in this debate today, highlighting the importance of fiscal standards, because during the election campaign, so many people told me that their mortgages had gone through the roof. They'd lost the ability to buy or rent their first home, or indeed any home, because of the actions of the last government. And I understand personally what it's like when a full-time job doesn't even cover the bills. My Gramps was a train driver. He taught me the importance of hard work and public service. He introduced me to the trade union movement and to the Labour Party, which I'm proud to say have been at the centre of my adult life. My mum was a factory seamstress and my dad was a plumber and then a police officer. And as a kid, times were tough. But our house was always full of love, humour and determination. My dad worked 3 jobs and my mum set about making childhood the very best it could be. But just as my gramps navigated the tracks with precision and care, my mum sewed with love and my dad served his community. I know that I will do the same with my time in this house, because the opportunity here is so very precious. Like so many of my colleagues on the government benches, I was the first in my family to go to university and the first to become a teacher, but thankfully not the last to enter what I still deem to be the very best profession in the world. The right education really does empower and give young people belief and opportunities to succeed, whatever their background and circumstances. I am so very proud to be part of a government that will bring down the barriers of opportunity and tackle child poverty, working across departments to ensure that all kids get the best start in life. Being a teacher for 24 years, I know that not everyone has the start in life that I had, and I feel privileged that I did. Being allowed to try things and fail were great lessons. Being from a working class background means sometimes I seem to be a bit impatient. This is because I know that people from my background must fight harder and do not often get a second chance, so you have to seize every opportunity as it arises. As an MP, I want to be able to champion children and young people from all backgrounds across my city, so that they are given every chance to succeed and fulfil their potential, whatever that may be and wherever that may take them. The children and young people in Portsmouth deserve nothing less. Portsmouth, as I've said, has been a city of firsts. The first dry dock in the world was built in 1495. The first ragged school was established in the name of John Pounds in 1818. We were the first to have a steam railway in 1837, and the first cooperative society in Britain was set up in 1796 by dockyard workers fed up with being ripped off by local tradesmen. The first fire-oiled HMS Queen Elizabeth was built in 1913, and the second ship is very close to my heart. In 1956, the first league football game was played under floodlights, Portsmouth versus Newcastle. And 2024 marks the time that the Portsmouth Women's Football Club have turned professional for the first time, and a nursery on Whale Island's naval base is pioneering a brilliant programme to help children deal with separation and the unique challenges of having a parent serving away whilst they are in the military. Portsmouth also produced the first female Secretary of State for Defence, and whilst I raise this first, I would like to pay tribute to my predecessor. Penny Morden's service to our city, and particularly her role in the coronation of our king, is to be celebrated. In this house, she had many roles in government. She has always championed the Royal Navy, and from what I hear, she loved her time in the parliamentary hairdressers. However, the sword now passes to me, and I will continue in her lead as I champion for our Royal Navy and our great city, both here and at home. Yeah. As for my final first for our great city, I stand here in this house for the first time in our city's history, where both Portsmouth MPs are Labour MPs. Yeah. Building on the predecessors, Lord Frank Judd, Sarah McCarthy-Fry, and my very dear friend, mentor and freeman of our city, Sid Rapson, and alongside my good friend, the new Minister for Early Education, the Honourable Member of Portsmouth South, we will work together night and day to be champions of change for the city we call home, Portsmouth. I'm so very proud of the positive campaign we ran in Portsmouth North. We unashamedly focused on the need for opportunity and for real change. I want to put on record my thanks to the many people who helped me get there, including the Pompey Bells, my amazing family of 17, friends and the dozens of volunteers from Portsmouth Labour and beyond. And as I begin my journey in this house, I know that the need for change has never been so great. As this debate highlights, after 14 years of Tory rule, there are so many uncertainties for the people in my city. People are struggling. The money just doesn't go far enough. Schools are underfunded and understaffed. Appointments in primary care, the NHS and dentistry are in some parts almost impossible to get. Youth services outside of the voluntary sector stretch only to offering support with probation. Our high streets are a mess and the housing is in complete chaos. But it's not just about money and pay, it's about pride. Pompey people are proud people. They don't shout about successes unless it's football. They equally rarely grumble, equally, unless it's football. Many of them just get their heads down, roll up their sleeves and get on with it. And many feel betrayed and let down by those who should have been there for them. And I know for some, trust in politicians has disappeared. And I can understand why. People on the doorstep and in the street are wary and fed up with broken promises. Many feel alone, isolated and betrayed. And having come from one of the most trusted professions in the country to one of the least, I get it. I know that as the MP for Portsmouth North, the chance for opportunity for real change lies with me. Real change. Change that people can see, feel and be part of. Positive change that they can proudly shout about. And as Alan Ball said, this is Portsmouth. People went to war from this city. It's a city that deserves the very best. And I aim to give my very best, representing and serving it. And what of the city of Portsmouth? We officially turn 100 years old in 2026 and have a raft of famous figures that have helped shape our city, including Charles Dickens, Isambard King and Brunel, and James Callaghan, a Labour Prime Minister, for whom next year I hope to secure a blue plaque in his honour. But as a city rich in culture as ours, it is also full of unsung people who should be right up there with the famous I've already listed. And these include, but are in no way an exhaustive list, Shamilla from Portsmouth City of Sanctuary, Ronnie at Pamodzi, Isabel from Loaves of Love, Laura at STEM Unity, and Mandy, an award-winning community volunteer. Just a few of those people in my city making it great. I also feel extremely privileged to have 7 magnificent wards in my constituency and to have lived, worked or had family and friends in every single one of them. They are all special and unique in their own right, from Porsgrove to Drayton and Farlington, Cosham, Hilsey and Nelson to Copner and Baffins. But they are all also very much Pompey, and when you walk down the street it would not be uncommon to hear, "Oi mush, don't be a squinny," or "Oi, you loon," or "din." As a whole, Portsmouth North is made up of the magnificent 7. 70,000 constituents, 35 schools, our brilliant Queen Alexandra Hospital, 11 GP practices, hundreds of charities, small, family-run, large, regional and national businesses, a municipal and thriving international ferry port, 7 allotments, 27 pubs, 4 static and 1 mobile library, a shoreline, the best view in the world to watch the sunrise or the sunset at Portsdown Hill with a cracking burger van, a pond, a marshland, a forest, albeit a mini one, and the training ground for the football club who are simply the best. It is sad to say, though, as a season ticket holder and a trust board member, Fratton Park resides in the south of my city, but I do get the brilliantly named John Jenkins training ground. So, Madam Chair, I stand here today not only as Amanda Martin, the Member of Parliament for Portsmouth North, but as a proud representative of a city that has always been full of firsts and will have so many more to come. I will acknowledge that together, as we work, we may face times of choppy waters, and as they say in the Navy, fair winds and following seas, and as they say at Fratton Park, play up Pompey. Thank you.
Visual delight of every corner of Portsmouth North. I now go to David Doogan.
Madam Chair, it's a great pleasure to follow the new Honourable Member for Portsmouth North on that rundown of our fantastic constituency. I want to go there now that I've heard about it, but actually she might be surprised to know I'm quite familiar with that part of the world around about Portsmouth North, Fareham, Gosport, Hailing Island, Southsea. It's a beautiful part of the world. Whilst it can't compete with Scotland in scenery, it certainly wins the day when it comes to weather in the summertime. She might also be surprised to know as well that there is a fairly high concentration of Pompey supporters in Perthshire, and that is a legacy of the Royal Naval Aircraft Workshops outside Perth, who used to go down to the Royal Naval Aircraft Yard in Gosport and pick up loyalty to Pompey from there. So many congratulations, not least on a fantastic maiden speech, but also on those exceptional shoes. Madam Chair, To the business at hand, I am concerned, troubled in fact, like many people will be, with the role of the Treasury and the Chancellor in these last couple of months. We are here today to talk about budget responsibility, and I wonder what answer we would get if we were to ask the 80% of pensioners on these islands who've been stripped of their, or about to be stripped of their winter fuel payment, what they think is responsible about that budget intervention. Or we could ask the millions living in poverty across these islands, a disgrace in and of itself, what they think about budget responsibility in their lives, now double scuppered by Labour's two-child cap. Or we could ask the millions of working poor across these islands trying to do right by their children, their employer, and just pay their bills to get by, who put their kids to bed every night and then sit up all night worrying about everything, what difference this fiscal lock will make to their lives. The Chancellor's first two acts upon taking up her role was to make life harder for the poorest families in society who have the least. And once she dispatched them, she turned her fire onto her pensioners, removing their winter fuel allowance. Austerity 2.0. It doesn't matter to Scotland whether austerity comes in a Labour wrapper or a Tory wrapper. It's still as caustic. This is relevant because the Chancellor wants us to believe that this bill and the fiscal lock will make everything okay. Well, it doesn't. The OBR will take no view on the qualitative merits or otherwise of any Treasury decision, but merely the quantitative dimension in fiscal terms. There are no locks in this bill to protect the people of these islands from this Labour Chancellor. And we hear ad nauseum that the Chancellor had no choice in any of these actions, that she had the worst inheritance since the war. And this goes on and on and on. Well, the numbers may be a little different, maybe a little bit worse than they were thought at the time. And I think there were some things that were hidden from view. But overall, the picture of the next 4 to 5 years is very, very similar to what we knew before the election. Not my words, Madam Chair. Those are the words of Paul Johnson, the Director of the Institute for Fiscal Studies. And if that's not good enough, the SNP warned throughout the election that if Labour stuck to Tory spending plans, taxes would rise and/or budgets would be cut. And here we are. The SNP even challenged Labour in Scotland on this point during the election, and the leader of Labour in Scotland, Anna Sarwar, said, "Read my lips, no austerity under Labour." Well, he's not saying that now, is he? Because he can't. Maybe the Chancellor can advise us, or her front bench can advise us, whether Mr Sarwar was having a stumble with the truth that day, or whether the Treasury front bench had forgotten to let their branch office in Scotland in on the plan. Yet, despite all of this, the Chancellor and her Treasury front bench persist in their claims over a £22 billion black hole to defend their indefensible attacks on the poorest in society. It's unacceptable, and this legislation, if enacted, will do nothing to protect communities from that. I'm troubled also by the language that the Treasury front bench seek to use in this, to accrue some form of disproportionate credit for bringing this bill forward. The bill at its core is nothing more than an additional provision to the existing Act. The exaggerated language around this exposes the weakness of the government's position on this fiscal lock. Nothing is either locked in or locked out by this legislation. The OBR can't stop any budget or fiscal adjustment, good, bad or indifferent. That is Parliament's role, as other honourable and right honourable members have pointed out. I pointed that out actually on second reading to the Treasury Minister, and they declined to concede on that absolute fact that this position is, as I've just set out. I hope he's had a chance to reflect on the so-called fiscal lock. It's nothing more than an administrative assessment of Treasury plans upon which nothing is contingent. The member for Walthamstow said that she's quite keen for her Treasury front bench to be held to a higher fiscal standard. Well, I think, well, fair enough, but this isn't going to do it. This is, in abstract, the narrowest one-dimensional protection from bad fiscal policy. The Labour Party, Madam Chair, are seemingly addicted, and this evidences it, to some sort of pound shop exaggeration and a troubling reliance on hyperbole when they're detailing something that is profoundly ordinary. And this fiscal lock and this bill won't protect the devolved nations and their budgets from the austerity of this Labour front bench. Before the general election, when Labour in Wales were facing NHS budget pressures, the now Secretary of State said that all roads lead to the Tories and Westminster in accordance with those budget pressures. Now, after the election, now that we've got a Labour government and the SNP in Scotland are facing those same budget pressures, it's the SNP's fault. Well, they can't have it both ways. They've got their job. They need to own it. The Chancellor literally claims that the SNP should raise income taxes to pay for her cut to the winter fuel allowance in Scotland. The cheek of it, Madam Chair. I'd like to remind the Treasury front bench, 70% of taxes raised in Scotland go directly to the Treasury. We've paid our dues, and we shouldn't have, and shame on the Chancellor for trying to get the Scottish taxpayers to pay twice to compensate for her axe wielding. The double standards of it all is staggering. She wants the Scottish Government to raise income taxes in Scotland, which is precisely what she refused to do ahead of the UK general election. Why won't she mirror the Scottish Government's progressive income tax regime to increase taxes slightly on those of us that are better off and reduce taxes slightly for those on the lowest incomes? That would raise nearly £16 billion for the Treasury. If she'd done that, if she'd followed the SNP Scottish Government's lead, she wouldn't have had to attack our pensioners' winter fuel allowance. A significant element of the budget responsibility is ensuring you own your decisions and you own your own mess. And Labour will find that we on these benches are keen to help them in that pursuit. In summary, Madam Chair, there is nothing particularly to object to in this inherently ordinary and transactional provision within the bill, except that is the behaviour of the government advancing it. Thank you.
Wilstone.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and congratulations on your position. I would also like to congratulate the Honourable Member for Portsmouth North on their inspiring speech. I feel like I know your constituency a little bit better now. And I also want to commend all of those who have delivered their maiden speeches today and in recent weeks. You've all been fantastic. It is truly an honour for me to give my maiden speech here in a debate on budget responsibility. I am proud to be elected in this new Labour government, a government committed to fiscal responsibility, credibility and accountability. We will ensure that the taxpayers' money is managed and spent wisely, not recklessly like the previous administration. I have the absolute pleasure to represent Swindon North, the town where I was born, raised and am proud to call my home. I am also proud of the fact that I am the first Member of Parliament in Swindon North's history to have been born in the town. I would like to pay tribute to my predecessor, Mr. Justin Tomlinson, who served as a Member of Parliament for North Swindon for 14 years. Justin was a ferocious campaigner and he also supported many local community groups and was incredibly passionate about football, namely our local club, Supermarine FC. Whilst we don't align politically, Justin has my respect, so I thank him for his service. I would also like to mention another former Member of Parliament for Swindon, one of my mentors, Labour peer Lord Michael Wills. I've learnt so much from Michael. Even though he is going through an incredibly tough time with his health, he has always been there to support and guide me with his expert knowledge. Not only is Michael a top-notch politician, he is also a published author on crime novels, something I only recently found out. But I guess it isn't too much of a surprise, considering he was once a Minister of State for Justice. I am truly privileged to follow in his footsteps, and if I am half the parliamentarian he was, I will have done Swindon proud. I hope the House will join me in wishing him a speedy recovery, and I hope to repay his trust in the Chamber. Yeah. I am the first Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt to be elected to Parliament. And I used to run my own academy. I promise this is somewhat relevant. When I left the army, I had offers to teach Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu across the world, from Abu Dhabi to Arizona, but I picked to come to Swindon. I often get asked why. Why did you choose Swindon? It's an easy answer for me. I love Swindon. I love my hometown. It is a wonderful town, built on industry, a town full of passion and hope. Our history is a proud history of reinvention. We started life as a farming town with a focus on pig markets. Then we transitioned and became a hub for the railways in the 19th century. Generations of railway workers and their families benefited from the cradle to the grave. Healthcare that is rumoured to have inspired the great NHS. As technology developed, so did Swindon. and we became home to the likes of Rover, Honda, and Mini. But what is next? We are at a pivotal point in history for my town. Where does Swindon go next? My hope is it will go as it always has into the future, at the forefront of new technologies, green technologies. And I also hope that the Right Honourable Member for Doncaster North hears this. It is my mission to foster green growth in Swindon and see the town thrive again, with high-skilled, well-paid jobs. And I believe a growing, stable economy, we can see that happen. But Madam Chair, Swindon isn't just famous for the high number of roundabouts that if anyone in this chamber has ever visited, I'm sure they will remember fondly. We've also had the pleasure of not one, but 2 James Bond movies being filmed in the town. Madam Chair, it is impossible to talk about Swindon without mentioning its people. The people make Swindon what it is, a kind, welcoming, industrious place full of passion, innovation, and the desire to support others. From strong local charities like BEST, a charity at the forefront of tackling antisocial behaviour through mentoring and sports, to the Kelly Foundation, who support people suffering with mental health issues, and Changing Suits, who are breaking down barriers in diverse communities to ensure people get the help that they need. Madam Chair, I want to say how proud I am of the residents in Swindon. We have seen tough times across the country, with riots sparked by division invading many communities. But they did not come to Swindon because in Swindon, we know that diverse communities can stand strong together against extremism. We will not let division and hatred divide us. We will unite together and stand strong. Swindon, however, Swindon, for all its qualities, is not without its fair share of challenges. Challenges I will face head on. Our people are among the least likely in the country to go on to higher education. We have growing levels of knife crime and antisocial behaviour, raw sewage being pumped in our streams, and residents of large housing estates being affected by unjust management companies and fleaseholds. However, I am confident that with our renewed Labour Party and our ambitious agenda set out in the King's Speech, from recruiting and retaining teachers, increasing police presence on our streets, and providing mental health professionals in schools, to reforming leasehold and fleaseholds, all backed and all fully costed in a fiscally responsible budget, the people of Swindon North will experience the positive change that they deserve. So to finish up, I am proud to be here representing such a fantastic group of people. It truly is the opportunity of a lifetime. So once again, thank you so much to the people of Swindon North who put their faith in me. I will not let you down. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Maiden speech, Marie Goldman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd first of all like to congratulate the honourable members who've also made their maiden speeches in this chamber this afternoon, and especially to congratulate the honourable member for Swindon North. His skills as a Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt, I wonder whether it actually led him to apply to be an extra in those films, those movies that were made. I shall be watching out for him in the fight scenes in the future. Madam Chair, it is the honour and privilege of my life to be standing in this chamber giving my maiden speech as the Member of Parliament for Chelmsford. A wonderful young city located in the heart of Essex that I have had the joy to call my home for the past 20 years or so. The Chelmsford constituency covers the main urban area of the city of Chelmsford. It is blessed with beautiful parks, flanking rivers that wind their way through the city centre, passing as they do the home of the Essex Eagles at the Essex County Cricket Ground. We have a thriving high street which attracts shoppers from miles around, and investment into the constituency from both the public and the private sectors means that its future continues to look bright. From Waterhouse Farm in the west to Chelmer Village in the east, from the northern reaches of Springfield to the southern boundaries of Goat Hall, and everywhere in between, I am proud to call Chelmsford my home, and even prouder to be standing here today representing its constituents in this magnificent place. Chelmsford has one of the busiest 2-platform train stations outside of London. Having now rejoined the ranks of the commuters, I know firsthand the importance of the brand new station that is being constructed just outside the northern edge of the Chelmsford constituency. The new Bewley Park station will have a significant positive impact on passengers from Chelmsford, giving them more choice and flexibility and removing the need for many of them to travel into the city centre to commence their rail journey. But a new station mustn't be seen as job done. Train travel in this country is expensive and complicated, and ultimately, I don't believe the public care too much about who runs the trains. They care more about how much rail travel costs them, whether the trains run on time, are they comfortable and efficient. And they are often frustrated by the bewildering array of ticket options whose detailed restrictions seem designed to either make you miss your train as you try to work out which one to buy or make you buy the wrong one. They are not designed for the faint of heart, nor the novice traveller. This seems madness if we want to encourage more people to make use of public transport. The whole system needs to be simplified, and I'm keen to see the legislation passed yesterday do just that. But without an economy that can support investment into projects like new rail stations or the redevelopment of junctions such as the Army and Navy, a major interchange in the centre of Chelmsford, we already know these projects are in danger of never happening at all. I am therefore pleased to support the bill set before us today to ensure the terrible, wasteful fiscal mistakes of previous governments aren't repeated and leaving more headroom for investment into our country's future. The new Bewley Park station was important to my predecessor, Vicky Ford, and I'd like to pay tribute to her dedication to this project. It is the culmination of over a decade of partnership work that Vicky joined after her first election to the Chelmsford constituency in 2017. Knocking on doors throughout this year's campaign, many constituents were grateful for her help with issues they had raised with her. They also noticed her visible loyalty to her party, as she was rarely seen without her trademark blue nail polish to match her little blue car and an outfit that almost invariably included a splash of blue. I'd like to thank her for the time she spent serving the Chelmsford constituency. From the very bottom of my heart, I'd like to thank the constituents of Chelmsford who have placed their trust in me to represent them in this place. I know, Madam Chair, that they did not do so lightly. Indeed, it has taken 74 years of very careful consideration for the good people of Chelmsford to send to this place anyone other than a Conservative. And indeed, it has been 100 years since they made the choice to elect a Liberal to represent them. Now, this slow pace of electoral change in Chelmsford may lead those not familiar with Essex's first city to conclude that Chelmsfordians have little appetite for innovation. But, Madam Chair, nothing could be further from the truth. Among other things, Chelmsford has a rich and distinguished history in the world of science and technology, most notably for hosting the first ever entertainment radio broadcast in the United Kingdom in 1920 from the Marconi New Street Works, right in the centre of Chelmsford, featuring Dame Nellie Melba. This led to regular entertainment broadcasts from Great Bayo in the south of the constituency, and eventually to what we now know as the BBC. It's hard to spend much time knocking on doors in Chelmsford and speaking to Chelmsford residents without coming across someone who used to work for Marconi. Its modern-day successor, Teledyne E2V, located little more than a stone's throw away from the site of the original Marconi factories, has more than taken up the mantle of innovation in Chelmsford, and many of my constituents are now employed there. Think of any space mission of the past few decades, and the chances are that its imaging equipment contains components designed and built by Teledyne in Chelmsford. From NASA's New Horizons mission to Pluto in the Kuiper Belt, launched in 2006, to the planned 2028 launch of Ariel by the European Space Agency to observe the atmospheres of thousands of planets beyond our own solar system, Teledyne and its employees are reaching for the stars. And that's what I want everyone to have the opportunity to do, to reach for the stars, to feel that sense of opportunity, to know that even the sky isn't the limit. But we can only do that if we invest. And the very best place for that investment is in our children and young people. We are lucky in Chelmsford to have excellent schools. And I'd like to thank the teachers and other school staff who work so hard every day to give the children that we entrust into their care the best possible start in life. But they are increasingly doing so with their hands tied behind their back, with dwindling resources, crumbling buildings, and ever greater workloads. I am the first in my family to go to university, the first to be elected to any public office, let alone a member of this House. I have been able to achieve this because I have a loving and supportive family, lots of incredible campaign volunteers, and, of course, a sizable dose of luck. But I also know that a critical part of my success is owed to the amazing state school education that I received, the dedicated and inspirational teachers that I was lucky enough to be taught by throughout my school life, and the extracurricular activities, in my case largely music-based, that broadened my horizons and lifted my eyes to the stars. I worry that is not the overwhelming experience of those going through our education system today. I worry that children are going through the day with little or no food in their bellies. I worry that schools are having to cut clubs because they no longer have the time or the resources to hold them. And I worry that the performing arts, such as music and drama, have been seen for too long by previous governments as expendable, as an unimportant luxury, without recognising that they provide children with the skills and confidence to stand up on large stages, dare I say, in parliamentary chambers, and be heard. And if you're a child with special educational needs or disabilities, well, good luck with that, because the system is utterly, tragically, devastatingly broken. But I also take hope from the wind of change that blew just a couple of months ago. We already know that there will be difficult choices ahead. But my hope is that we recognise that investing early on, giving children the best possible start, can pay much greater dividends in the future. When Guglielmo Marconi brought his fledgling inventions and experiments to the United Kingdom in 1896, he did so because he believed that this is a country that can see potential and will invest in that potential for the long term. It paid off, and a whole industry grew from the humble beginnings of a short radio broadcast in the heart of my constituency. Whatever choices are made by the party opposite in the looming budget, it is my sincere hope that they recognise the importance of giving schools and teachers the resources they need to allow children, all children, to reach for the stars. Thank you.
Yeah.
Maiden speech. Bayo Alaba. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Alaba, Madam Chair.
Bayo Alaba. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to commend the Honourable Member from Chelmsford for a great speech. I know Chelmsford well. It's a beautiful town. And her passion with regards to sort of supporting young people in school and the journey of young people in school is very important. It's something that we need to protect. So, Madam Chair, excuse me. Thank you for allowing me today to make my first contribution to this House. I think it's right to start off by thanking my predecessor as MP, Sir James Duddridge, for 19 years of dedicated service. He became MP in 2005 when Southend, East and Rochford was newly redrawn. The rural areas to the north of Southend have been brought back within the constituency for the first time in many years. Throughout many boundary iterations, from Southend East and Rochford to Rochford and Southend East, you can see just how creative they were in terms of renaming sort of constituencies and back again. But the area's always been Tory held up until now. So I'm particularly proud to speak here today as the seat's first ever Labour representative. Yeah. The constituency consists of not just the city of Southend, but of the villages of Great Wakering, Kenewden, Barling, Paglesham, Stanbridge, Shoebury-Ness, and the suburbs of Southchurch and Fort Bay and Rochford itself. It is a beautiful constituency, rich in culture, where you should bring your walking boots as well as your swimming costume. It is the place where Dame Helen Mirren went to primary school and is home to the Cliffs Pavilion, who hosted Oasis in 1995. Although it might be tricky next time round, depending on who can get tickets. We are also, I am contractually obliged to mention, as a Southender, to tell you that Southend is the site of the longest pier in the world, 2,158 metres, with the option to walk or take a purpose-built train. I made a mistake some years ago of walking it with my son, who's a little bit older now, who's up in the gallery, and my calves were struggling by the end of it. Watching the maiden speeches of Labour colleagues, past and present, I have been struck by the nature of the local industries so often name-checked. Tin, pottery, steel, textiles and coal are among the staple products in historic Labour seats. These are noble and important goods. They are Labour goods, but they are not the stock in trade of my own seat. Southend's primary industry and expertise has always been tourism, good times, escapism, and happy memories. These are our exports. Southend is a city which allows you to meet a sea turtle, admire a vintage car, win a very large teddy bear, and even have your palm read, often during the course of a single day. It is a place where past generations have gone in search of freedom and pleasure, and it's hard in today's world to think of a calling more important than this. Indeed, the musician Billy Bragg immortalised one of the roads which takes you to Southend in his 1985 song, A13 Trunk Road to the Sea. The chorus name-checked Shoeburyness and Bragg later said that he hoped his song would imbue the A13 motorway. I know it was a bit of a reach, but there you go. With the same romance as Route 66 in America, the road to your dreams, which runs from Chicago to Los Angeles. This was a lofty lyrical ambition indeed, and it was always going to be a hard ask. But speaking as someone who grew up in the East End of London in that era, I can confirm that the idea of Southend did always carry a certain magic. It's one reason why I feel so privileged to represent the area today. Another reason is the constituency's military heritage. At the eastern part of my seat, you'll find Shoeby Garrison, an area steeped in military history. And in the north is Southend Airport, which now serves holidaymakers, but which in a past life was Rochford Airfield, a World War II fighter base that helped to fend off fascism during the Second World War. As a former soldier myself, I was stationed in Southend, in the Southend area for a short while. And one of my great pleasures when canvassing is running into old army friends that are still living in the seat if they're prepared to open the door to me. For me, as someone who left school with no qualifications, who got into a lot of trouble as a young boy and needed a second chance, night school and the military provided a lifeline for me. I quite simply would not be here today in the mother of all parliaments without the opportunities it gave me and the ethos of service that it instilled within me. So to properly understand Southend, you need to understand its proud military history too. The city is built on a blend which I say is unique. Excuse me. The discipline and the dignity of the armed forces combined with the creativity and the freedom of the arts, a place for both the soldier and the singer, if you like. There's a risk of getting too misty-eyed here. Coastal areas like mine have been on the economic sharp end for 30 or 40 years, and the root cause of this, most notably, budget air travel, and that's not going away. Recent years have brought fresh challenges. Meanwhile, Southend's economy was at the sharp end during the COVID pandemic. As a city, we are still in its recovery phase, and many of the jewels in Southend's crown, the Curlsall venue on the seafront, the Freight House in Rochford, remain unused or underused. I'm determined that these buildings will come back to life again as part of our future. And I do believe change is afoot. There is a Southend Renaissance at work. The people of Southend are ready to seize the initiative and want more. Southend is a strong, independent, and unbelievably hard-working. This weekend just gone, for instance, we held a City Jam, an awe-inspiring international street art festival, now in its third year. But we can't do it alone. And this is one of the reasons why I'm so pleased not just to be Southend's first ever Labour MP, but to be one of many first-time Labour MPs in seaside seats we have never won before. My fellow members, seats such as Southend, East and Rochford need a real and impactful regional policy. Too little thought has been put into how we build on existing assets and specialisms and to build a sense of place and economic centre of gravity. Southend, East and Rochford's future will be found in modern technology, modern infrastructure, green energy, and by identifying opportunities in well-paid modern job sectors. A year-round economy, not just a seasonal one, so young people can move from seasonal work into better paid positions, Simply put, Southend, East and Rochford will need to regain its cultural capital. Madam Chair, this is something I have some experience in, having been one of the creative pioneers of East London's creative industries. My wife Debbie and children are here in the lobby today, or up in the gallery, like they've always been during my career. Certainly during this sort of career pivot from the creative industries into politics. And I thank them for their unwavering support and complete belief in me. I believe it's my duty to help shape and create the future jobs and businesses for this generation and future generations to grow into. Just like Ade Bayo Alaba and Atunike Awesu, my late parents, who sacrificed everything as part of the Windrush generation to leave their families and communities behind in Nigeria in order to raise a family here in one of the most welcoming countries in the world. Simply put, it is now my job to ensure communities such as Southend, East and Rochford are vibrant, dynamic, stable and welcoming. So when we talk about public finances, as we do at today's debate, Madam Chair, I believe we should all bear this in mind. Our economy will be strongest if we can fill the potential in every corner of the country, on the esplanades of Southend and in the town centres of Rochford and Southend, places which have so much to contribute to our economy and our culture, yet have too often been sidelined. And so I look forward to representing my constituents in this House. I look forward to contributing to future debates around our economic future, and I look forward to contributing to many and other discussions besides. Thank you.
Yeah. Will Forster to make his maiden speech.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me this opportunity to make my maiden speech. Before I do, I just want to pay tribute to the Honourable Member for Southend, East and Rochford. He spoke of his and his constituency's proud military past, and I'm sure he will see his constituency through the tough challenges and onto a brighter future as well. It goes without saying, it is a great privilege and an honour of a lifetime to be here and to be elected by the people of Woking. I want to thank them for electing me as their Member of Parliament. However, I must begin by addressing this bill and the severe crisis facing my local authority, Woking Borough Council. Despite being a relatively small borough council, the Conservatives left Woking with over £2 billion of debt following making risky investment decisions. This legacy is one of negative equity, service cuts and unsustainable debt repayments. It could be argued that the Conservatives in Woking invented trust economics before the former Right Honourable Member for South West Norfolk had her small stint as Prime Minister. What has happened in my constituency shows you why this bill is so important. I fear without support from the new government, the situation in Woking, like the rest of local government, will only worsen, and it's my constituents will suffer the most. And that isn't acceptable when it's absolutely not their fault. I urge the government to step in and provide the assistance we so desperately need to ensure that my community can thrive and recover. When most people think of Woking, they might see it as a modern constituency, but it has a rich history that stretches back through the centuries. Woking was mentioned in the Domesday Book. Sutton Place, famous as the former home of Paul Getty, dates from 1525, and it's one of the oldest unfortified houses in the country. Woking Palace, now sadly a ruin, was a royal residence for Henry VII and Henry VIII. As a result of that, Woking Football Club, my local football team, is affectionately known as the Cards, after Cardinal Wolsey. Several Acts of Parliament have had an especially profound impact on Woking. As an example, the Basingstoke Canal was authorised by Parliament in 1778. That canal runs through much of Woking constituency. It has shaped our area, is a popular walking and cycling route, and is a haven for nature. But Woking, as we know it today, like so many places in our country, was shaped by the railways. With steam, stone and iron, Woking was cast into the proud town it is today. In the mid-1800s, it we laid the foundations to become the great commuter town we are. Woking is also a wonderfully diverse and welcoming place, home to the oldest mosque in the country, the Shah Jahan Mosque. And we've got a vibrant Muslim community that has developed in the town as a result. More recently, we have welcomed Ukrainian refugees, and I attended many events to support our new Ukrainian residents with my predecessor, our former MP, Jonathan Lord. That was a powerful example of cross-party cooperation, and I want to thank Jonathan for his service as Woking's MP, especially on this humanitarian issue where there was no disagreement whatsoever. Although we were opponents in the last election, I wish him and his family well for the future. Woking's MP before Jonathan was Humphrey Mallins. Humphrey founded the Immigration Advisory Service in 1992, which to this day provides free asylum and immigration advice to those that need it. He got a CBE for his work. Woking has a proud history of electing MPs that welcome immigration, and I am pleased to follow that tradition. Our town is also known for its connection to McLaren, who hosts the Formula One team and build luxury cars there. I was privileged to visit there only yesterday, and I remember as a young child, around 11, watching with the excitement as McLaren toured the town with their Formula One cars driven by Mika Hakkinen to celebrate their success. And they are winning again, much like the Liberal Democrats. The town also takes great pride in being home to WWF. We have pressing issues like sewage in our rivers and the fight against climate change. And I'm already working alongside the 5 other newly elected Liberal Democrat MPs in Surrey to hold Thames Water to account for sewage dumping in our local rivers and streams. One of my first acts as MP is to bring all the Surrey MPs together to meet with Thames Water to petition them for improvements and a better service. Woking is fortunate to be surrounded by green spaces. I love walking my Dachshund Toffee in Horsell Common, where H.G. Wells famously landed his aliens in War of the Worlds. So it wasn't a great surprise when Ed Davies, Liberal Democrats, turned up and started campaigning with their out-of-their-world stunts. Of course, I'm only Woking. I wouldn't dare call my Liberal Democrat colleagues aliens. But, Madam Chair, getting back to the matter at hand, my constituency has a much-loved local hospital, Woking Community Hospital. Despite feeling like I was born and bred in Woking, I wasn't actually born in the constituency. Actually, no one has been able to be born in a hospital in Woking for generations. I was born in Frimley Park Hospital, one of the nearby hospitals we depend on as Woking lacks maternity services. However, Frimley Park is plagued with RAC, and its future is far from certain. I will work with my honourable friend, the member for Surrey Heath, so that we can press the government for a solution for them to rebuild Frimley Park Hospital. Another major issue is the cost of rent and mortgages. As someone under 40, I understand these issues deeply, and they have been consistently raised by local people on the doorstep. The increased cost of mortgages and rents in the last 2 years is another further reason why this bill is so important. My journey into politics began because Surrey County Council's failure to protect vulnerable children. At the time, it was rated the worst county council in the country because of that failure. We cannot allow vulnerable children to be failed again. Madam Chair, the wider theme of why I was elected, indeed why so many hard-working Liberal Democrat colleagues have been elected, is that we understand the local issues of our communities. I have worked for 15 years in local government and served as Deputy Leader of Woking Council. I have seen firsthand the crippling issues some councils face. When I look at the faces of the Liberal Democrat MPs here, I can see people that have worked hard in local government for years. What a glorious theme for this new Parliament. A cohort of 72 that understand the local issues our communities face and a force for good when in this country and in this chamber when we need it most. Thank you.
Jake Richards to make his maiden speech.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Chair. It's such a great privilege to be speaking in this debate, making my maiden speech after honourable members from Woking and Chelmsford, and also honourable friends from Southend who made a fantastic speech about the town in his constituency, which I have had the great privilege of swimming at, and his speech did due justice to that great place. And as well as my honourable friend from Swindon North, who made a faintly terrifying speech about his Brazilian jiu-jitsu skills, certainly he did due justice as well to Swindon. It's a great honour to be speaking in the chamber as the Member of Parliament for Rother Valley. For so many on this side of the House in particular, making our maiden speech is the conclusion to long and hard-fought campaigns in which we were ultimately victorious. And whilst in the early hours of the 5th of July, which just happened to be my birthday, we celebrated the end of 14 years of Conservative government and the first Labour government of my adult life, we also accept the responsibility that we have been given humbly. Because in the context of an often bitter and heated political campaign, and from the thousands of valued conversations I had in my constituency, one cannot avoid the fact that we as a country face daunting and urgent challenges. There is a deep apathy towards the ability of politics, and indeed this place, to effect change that cannot be overlooked. The rise of online disinformation and blaming bogeymen that do not exist. Conspiracy theorists and keyboard warriors purposefully ignoring the complexities of the world around us for attention. A political culture that too often thrives on division and controversy, not the common good. The hyperactive, vitriolic politics seen so often across the Atlantic, seeping into our discourse here, undermining constructive dialogue. An epidemic of alienation amongst our young people, with levels of self-harm and suicide in my constituency increasing all the time. Children arriving at school still in nappies, and too often without breakfast in their bellies. Waiting lists for mental health support, now stretching to half a decade. By the time many are seen, they are about to reach their majority. Too many people feel they have to leave their village or town in my constituency to get on in life. A disillusionment that their home, their community, their place is no longer offering the security and hope that people deserve. There is a fear for the future. I was told so often during the election campaign, what's the point of politics? This country is broken. And perhaps some of these factors came to the fore over the summer recess, when a group organised to attend a hotel just a few miles from my constituency in Wath, planning to set that building on fire, knowing full well that there were innocent people inside. The pictures on our televisions were difficult to comprehend, and I have spoken to a young mother who had been made homeless and was being temporarily accommodated there with her children, and the terror she described will haunt me forever. But Madam Deputy Chair, from the gloom of this violent act came hope, because the day after the hotel was attacked, I reached out to the Muslim community in my constituency and was invited to a meeting after evening prayer. I arrived eager to show solidarity, but anxious about the fear and damage the community would have suffered. And yes, there was plenty of concern, but the first question I encountered was not one of anger or retribution, but instead a comment, urging me to speak with those who had perpetrated the violence to better understand the causes and motivation. It was a moment of great generosity and sensitivity, and one that will always stay with me. And indeed, that spirit of togetherness, caring about the bonds which unite us, is everywhere to be seen in the Rother Valley. The Dinnington Boxing Club held an event after the riots with several South Yorkshire boxing clubs to show unity and togetherness, a determination to portray South Yorkshire in a different light. And that spirit runs through the club. I'll always recall having a pint at the Little Mester in Northampton when a young lad from the club arrived to rapturous applause, only to explain that he had casually run a marathon that morning on his own, wholly unorganised, to raise money for a local children's hospice. He'd heard they'd required more funds for toys. I think of the Dementia Cafe at Winthrop Gardens, which provides such an invaluable service, or the Maltby Lions, who are out every week, rain or shine, to raise money for deserving causes. I think of the Community Cafe at the beautiful Ully Reservoir, or the work of the Salvation Army at the Dinnington Food Bank, or the Community Fridge in Kiverton Park, or the Volunteer Gardeners in Harthill, the Community Energy Project at Woodsets, the Macmillan Coffee Mornings in Anston. This spirit ultimately wins the day, even in the shadow of horror. Madam Deputy Chair, in a previous life as a pupil barrister, I sat behind prosecuting counsel at the trial of the murder of Joe Cox MP. I learnt an awful lot, not about legal process or criminal procedure, but from Joe's family, who arrived each day at court with smiles, holding hands and a bag of sweets that they offered to assembled journalists, security guards, and indeed the lawyers, including the defence barrister. Madam Deputy Chair, I take inspiration from their strength. It was an honour to campaign for the Honourable Member for Spen Valley in that vital by-election, and even more so to share these green benches with her today. And that spirit of generosity, the strength of unity in the face of the darkest forces, is what I will try to further in my role in this place. And in that spirit, Madam Deputy Chair, I praise Alexander Stafford, my predecessor, who was a hard-working MP and leaves the House as his brother arrives. And no doubt the member for Farnham and Borden will follow in his brother's footsteps. In this place, Alexander will perhaps be best remembered for his work promoting the independence of Somaliland. And I know from my own social media that many in Hargeisa were very grateful for the adoption of their cause. I thank him for their service. Madam Deputy Chair, in conclusion, I will work hard every day in this place to do my utmost to tackle the forces of division and darkness during my time here and do my bit to bring people together. Because after all, as Joe Cox told us, we have more in common than that which divides us.
Clive Jones for his maiden speech.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for calling me to make my maiden speech. I'd like to congratulate the Honourable Member for the Rother Valley. It's a very good speech, very interesting, and I learnt an awful lot about your constituency. I also learnt a lot today about Southend East and Rochford, Portsmouth North, Swindon North, and especially about my colleagues from Wokingham and Chelmsford. I actually knew quite a lot about them before, but it was nice to hear some more. I particularly liked the speech from the member for Loughborough, who suggested that the Minister might like to get his chequebook out. I'd like to say, if you are getting your chequebook out, then I would like you to be spending some money for the constituents of Wokingham. Members on these benches have a very strong sense of social justice. This comes to us from many directions during our lives. 50 years ago, I had a very inspirational social and religious studies teacher, John Featherstone, who I'm grateful for helping instill these values in me. This sense of social justice will, I hope, guide me during my time in this house. And I'm very pleased that John is in the gallery up there today. Madam Chair, it's a pleasure to represent the constituency of Wokingham, whose boundaries somewhat changed at the last general election. I'd like to pay tribute to my three predecessors, who each represented part of the constituency. From James Sunderland, the former MP for Bracknell, my constituency inherited the parishes of Finchampstead and Wokingham Without. I always found James approachable and straightforward, and I understand his constituents found the same. Sir John Redwood was the MP for the former Wokingham constituency for a remarkable 37 years, a tremendous stint of public service in which he had a profound influence on public policy. He served in Margaret Thatcher's government as a junior minister and in John Major's cabinet as Secretary of State for Wales, where he is best known for his enthusiastic miming of the Welsh national anthem. The wards of Thames and Twyford were represented by Lady Theresa May for 27 years, a dedicated public servant who served as Home Secretary and Prime Minister. She also has a well-deserved reputation with her former constituents who hold her in high regard and talk about her warmly, with affection and with much respect. Although our politics are different, I wish all of them well in their future endeavours. Madam Chair, it's an honour and a privilege to be elected to represent the people of Wokingham, where I have lived for much of the last 50 years. I went to school here. My children went to school here. They were born in the nearby Royal Berkshire Hospital, the hospital where I am proud to be a governor. It's also the hospital where doctors found my cancer in 2008 and began my successful treatment. In 2016, they were there to help me again and diagnosed the need for a quadruple heart bypass. Without the Royal Berkshire Hospital, I wouldn't be standing here today. Our NHS staff are wonderful, and clinicians at the Royal Berkshire Hospital deserve all the praise that is heaped on them by my constituents. Madam Chair, today we are debating the Chancellor's Budget Responsibility Bill. In the previous debate, the Chancellor announced the pausing of the new hospital building programme, which included the Royal Berkshire Hospital. Parts of the building of the hospital date back to 1839, and staff have to work in offices where the windows don't open and the staff have to regularly walk around buckets that are there to catch dripping rainwater. I must repeat my plea to both the Chancellor and the Secretary of State for Health for a speedy decision as to when this much-needed rebuild of our beloved hospital will happen. If I may, Madam Chair, I'd like to give you a short tour of the Wokingham constituency. In the north is the world-famous Henley Regatta course at Remenham and the very successful Leander Rowing Club, one of the most successful sports clubs in the world. I was delighted when the Prime Minister chose to visit the Leander Club during the recent general election, and even more so that his visit coincided with a boat trip that myself and the honourable members for Henley and Tame and St Albans were making to highlight the issue of dumping of raw sewage in our waterways. It was fun to wave at the Prime Minister from this beautiful stretch of river, and all of the media seemed to be enjoying it as well. Wokingham has wonderful, picturesque villages. Walgrave is recorded in 1061 and in the Domesday Book. The village of Twyford dates from 871, when Alfred the Great's army escaped Viking pursuers by crossing the River Loddon. Wokingham has a thriving and growing brewing sector, establishing great reputations amongst beer lovers, including the Loddon Brewery, the Elusive Brewery, and the Siren Brewery. The Stanlake Wine Estate in Hurst is one of the oldest wine producers in England. The Chancellor will know that our town centres and village centres, like many others in the UK, are finding life difficult. The cost of living crisis created by the previous government continues to limit people's spending power, and online competition is ruthless. Business rates are a huge issue for our local retailers who make our high streets the great places they are. And I do hope that the Chancellor and Ministers will look into reform of the business rates at the earliest opportunity. Wokingham Town received its market charter in 1219. I thoroughly recommend the market, especially the fruit and veg stall and the fishmonger. And my wife also likes me to buy flowers for her from Darren's flower stall. She says they last longer than any supermarket flowers. Using this market is good value for money and an important part of our local character. Today, the constituency is gaining a reputation as a home for life science businesses. And I was pleased, when leader of the council, to be involved in the early stages of discussions with Lonza, a Swiss public company who will be investing several £100 million in the constituency over the next few years. Wokingham has many charities where volunteers work hard to improve the lives of our residents. I'll just mention a few. The Wokingham Food Bank, First Days, Wokingham in Need, Building for the Future, Citizens Advice, Age UK Berkshire, Wokingham United Charities and the Cowshed. The dedication and hard work of volunteers in these charities and many others is truly inspirational. In the southern part of the constituency is the former Remy Garrison in Arborfield, with which the town had an important relationship for many years. John Walter, a newspaper editor and politician and the son of the founder of the Times, lived on the Bayo estate. He was a Whig MP for the county of Berkshire before 1832. Early beginnings of what I hope will become a long-standing tradition in our area. Madam Chair, from your chair, you must be thinking that this 59th Parliament has so many young faces. As I know, and I hope you will be including me in that category. I bet you're wondering, what is this secret? Well, it's very simple. I worked in the toy industry for many years, running manufacturing and importing businesses. So playing with toys every day for the last 30 to 40 years is what makes me look so young. Our toys made many young people and their parents happy, and I'm hoping to be just as successful in my second career, helping the people of Wokingham to improve their lives. If I can achieve this, I will have had 2 worthwhile careers. Finally, Madam Speaker, I'm grateful to the many people, in particular my family and friends, who have helped me in my campaigns to be elected to the House of Commons, some of whom are in the gallery today. Wokingham has never before elected a Liberal Democrat MP. I will work tirelessly to represent my constituents, and I will endeavour to make them feel recognised and supported. I come here idealistic and hopeful, hoping we can make the public feel the same about our institutions and ensure we do them justice on these battered but far from broken green benches. Thank you very much.
Maiden speech, Sonia Kumar.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me the opportunity to give my maiden speech today. It's a great pleasure to follow the Honourable Member of Wokingham and to listen to the excellent speeches given in this chamber. It's an honour to address the House as a new Member of Parliament for Dudley. The last Labour MP to represent Dudley was Ian Austin, now Lord Austin, who served as a Minister for the West Midlands in the last Labour government. And he was a passionate and dedicated servant for the town that he grew up in. My immediate predecessor, Marco Longhi, also had a deep passion for the heritage of Dudley, and in his contributions to the House, he sought to protect the historic buildings, not just in our town, but throughout our country. And now I look forward to playing my part in protecting and preserving the heritage, but to go further in preserving our remarkable healthcare system. Working at the Dudley Group NHS Foundation Trust as a physiotherapist, I saw patients from across our town, from Gornal, Castle and Priory, St Thomas's, Brockmore Pensnet, St James's, Sedgley, Upper Gornal and Woodsetton. Seeing firsthand the ongoing issues faced by NHS and hearing firsthand about the challenges my patients encountered served as a catalyst for my decision to enter this House. My primary goal is to enhance the well-being of my residents in Dudley, but also to secure the NHS so it's equipped to meet the evolving needs of our country.
the NHS, founded by a Labour government, is truly a remarkable institution, and its history, achievements and challenges remind us of the importance of investing in a comprehensive and fair healthcare system. Dudley is the capital of the Black Country, and I know my neighbouring honourable members will agree. It has a long and proud history celebrated on Black Country Day. Dudley was the driving force behind the Industrial Revolution. It's the seat of Dudley Castle, which was built by the Normans, and where you can visit the delightful Dudley Zoo. Yet attractions in Dudley go back even further than that. Wren's Nest National Reserve is part of the Black Country UNESCO Geopark. It's one of the oldest limeworks in the UK, and the rock there is 428 million years old. And Wren's Nest contains over 700 different types of fossils. People come from all over the world to visit Wren's Nest and to find fossils. And I invite my honourable members to walk around Wren's Nest with me to look at the spectacular landscape and see if they can find a fossil of their very own to take home. Perhaps nothing displays the pride the people of Dudley have as much as the Black Country Living Museum. This magnificent tourist attraction not only promises a Boston day out, but also has been used as a filming location for, amongst others, the TV series Peaky Blinders and films like Stan and Ollie. The museum has recently added a new attraction to show what life was like in the 1940s, 1950s and 1960s. And a few years ago, the museum had an exhibition to mark 100 years since the granting of women's suffrage. It's a measure of the progress we have made since then that I can now make my maiden speech as Dudley's first female MP. Yeah. Like the Black Country Museum, Dudley too has changed through its times. In the past, Dudley has smelt iron ore, mined coal and limestone, and built a canal network that stretched across the country. Now, Dudley-based businesses such as the Black Country Innovation Manufacturing Organisation has a world-class centre for rail innovation, helping towns and cities across the world meet the challenges of the 2020s. This bill too helps us meet the challenge of the future by protecting market stability, public trust, by ensuring that the government's fiscal plans are independently and transparently scrutinised, future-proofing our economy. This will help business owners like my father, Ashok Kumar, who arrived in this country at the age of 9. He set up his own business and is still working as a greengrocer 45 years on. He taught me the importance of hard work and heritage. Nothing more gives me pleasure than as a new MP talking to business owners like my dad. I'd like to finish by paying contribution to my two extraordinary women who without I would not be in this chamber today. My sister, who from the moment I was born has been my guiding light. She has supported me unconditionally, encouraged me to pursue my dreams, and today and for many days teaches me never to give up. Yeah. And my ma, Rajinder Kaur, who taught me the values of community, faith and resilience. She was an inspiring Bollywood actress, and while my mother's dreams of becoming a Bollywood actress may have fallen short, her legacy will be etched in history today by mentioning her name in this house today. Yeah. Honourable members will be pleased to know this speech is nowhere near the length of a Bollywood movie and is coming to a close. I finish by turning once more to the people of Dudley. It is an honour to represent you and our great town in this House. I promise I will work as hard as I can to bring prosperity and happiness to our town, and I will not let you down.
Yeah. Ellie Chowles.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd like to start by paying tribute to the excellent maiden speech by the Honourable Member for Dudley just now, and indeed the more than half dozen excellent maiden speeches we heard today, several of which touched on themes that my amendment relates to, i.e. the climate crisis and the future of children in our country. And I've been really touched to hear the passion with which all of those new members spoke about their experiences and their commitments. The amendment I'm proposing today, Madam Chair, number 5, requires the OBR to report on the impact of fiscally significant measures announced by the government on the UK's statutory net zero target. The justification for this is that we simply cannot separate the economy and the climate. They are interlinked. And to deliver the green economic transformation that we so urgently need, and that in fact was referenced by honourable members speaking earlier today, every single policy must be aligned with the UK's net zero target, and every government spending decision should be as well. So it makes sense to increase the OBR's remit on net zero, specifically to consider the impact of climate risks on economic stability and how far policies introduced at fiscal events will reduce or increase these risks. Fiscal events, namely budgets and spending reviews, lock in what's happening in our economy for years to come, possibly even generations. So, to be honest, it beggars belief that they aren't properly taking account of climate impacts. Whether those policies are spending on new roads, subsidies and tax breaks for oil and gas, investment in renewables infrastructure, or giveaways like a freeze on fuel duty, they all have clear, direct impacts on the UK's prospects of meeting our net zero target. And those impacts should be made clear and considered explicitly in the policy-making process. We need to be thinking about the impact of today's economic policies on the prospects for future generations. The costs of failing to take an approach that considers climate impacts are eye-watering. A 2022 report by the Grantham Institute found that climate change damages to the UK are projected to triple by 2050 and more than double again 50 years later. So climate prudence and fiscal prudence, Madam Chair, are one and the same thing. And given that the OBR's main duty is to assess the health of the UK economy and the sustainability of its public finances, it needs to be charged with assessing if fiscal events are reducing or increasing climate risks to the economy. So, bringing net zero into the OBR's mandate is consistent with the government's 5 missions. Indeed, in announcing your clean energy superpower document, you said, the Labour Party said, we will add net zero mandates to all relevant regulators that need it. I would argue that the OBR is a relevant regulator that needs a net zero mandate. That is why I'm proposing this probing amendment today. It would also represent increased transparency, which other members have mentioned today, transparency around how fiscal policy choices are impacting the UK's progress towards our net zero targets, and help ensure that future governments also consider this. And it's an important stepping stone towards a net zero test, which would assess the aggregate climate and nature impact of every fiscal event. And again, this is something that Labour committed to in opposition. So I ask the Minister to perhaps comment in his winding up remarks on whether he would be able to ensure that this test is integrated into the legislation that you are proposing. I therefore really hope that you will use this opportunity to publicly commit to introducing a net zero test in government and to take a step towards doing it by backing my amendment today. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Maiden speech, Lauren Edwards.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak, Madam Chair. I pay tribute to the many honourable members who have given such impressive maiden speeches already today. It is an honour to follow the member for Dudley, who gave such a passionate speech about her constituency and certainly did her family very proud. Yeah. And although she has left her place, can I also commend the member for Chelmsford for her excellent speech, which, as somebody born in Australia, I particularly appreciated for its reference to the Australian opera singer Dame Nellie Melba. Financial market stability and public trust in announcements on fiscally significant measures are, funnily enough, not issues that come up regularly on the doorstep. But the real-life consequences when these two important pillars of our society are lacking were central to the recent conversations that I had across Rochester and Strood. The cost of living pressures, already challenging for most, were heightened as families found they had to pay, on average, hundreds of pounds more just to put a roof over their heads. The cause of that additional pressure, the former Truss government's mini-budget, was a deeply undesirable situation that this bill seeks to prevent from ever happening again. One of the reasons given for the adverse market reaction to that mini-budget was the lack of forecast by the Office for Budget Responsibility, an omission which in turn contributed to a lack of investor confidence in the plans. Political parties, whatever their colour, can have the best policies in the world, but if they are not backed with economic competence and market confidence in those who are holding the purse strings, then no one will be better off for them. We cannot and should not play fast and loose with the economy. And so I, like many others, take great comfort from the bill that we are discussing today. This includes the chair of the OBR himself, Robert Hughes, who says the bill will address a gap in the current law and serve to strengthen the legal foundations for fiscal management. It is surely only right that policymakers, when making major fiscal decisions, base those decisions upon up-to-date economic and fiscal outlooks, published at the same time to give maximum transparency. I dwell so much on economic stability as I view it as a necessary precondition for economic growth, this government's chief mission. And because in recent years there has not been, certainly in my view, enough focus on the latter in places like Medway. I am immensely proud to call Rochester and Strood my home and honoured to have been given the opportunity by its residents to represent them here in this place. I will work hard every day to ensure that residents' voices are heard in this chamber and to get a better deal for everybody in Rochester and Strood. I will do this by continuing to drive regeneration work in my constituency, work I began as a former cabinet member on Medway Council. I will work with the government and the private sector to bring more investment to our towns and villages, to support the local business community to thrive, and to provide more opportunities for young people so that they don't feel they need to move away in order to get on in life. Rochester and Strood has many strengths, not least the military presence at Brompton Barracks, home of the Royal Engineers, the River Medway that runs the length of the constituency and that has so much potential for industry, leisure and tourism, and a very rich maritime history from the days of Chatham Dockyard. We have a burgeoning creative community centred at Chatham Intra, developing green industries out on the Hoo Peninsula, and high-quality technical colleges and universities. But we also have high levels of deprivation in the constituency, not enough good quality and affordable housing, an overburdened hospital, and not enough infrastructure, including health services, public transport and banking services to support our communities, particularly on the more rural Strood side of the constituency. Tackling these issues, among others, will occupy my time in this place, with the simple aim that I leave things better than when I arrived. My commitment to public service will not waver, whatever the political weather, because that is what I have been sent here to do, and it is a responsibility that I take immensely seriously. Although I chose Rochester and Strood as my home in adulthood, I would like to pay tribute to my predecessor, Kelly Tolhurst, who was born and raised in the constituency and is quite rightly very proud of that fact. As she said in her own maiden speech, her successful journey is one that every young person growing up in our community should feel is possible for them. Her commitment to and love for the place that she grew up in is undisputed, and I thank her genuinely for her years of service. Madam Chair, like many new MPs, I have been thinking very carefully about how I can use the skills and experience from my previous career to support the important legislative work done in this place and to benefit my constituents. It was my experience working here during the last financial crisis that led me to become a financial regulator at the Bank of England, and so I aim to use my voice to ensure that the pursuit of much-needed economic growth is done in such a way as to preserve the stability of our economy and our financial system. I intend to draw on my 13 years' experience as an elected trade union representative to ensure that the New Deal for working people delivers for my hard-working constituents who often struggle with insufficient pay and rights, and to help drive the government's commitment to invest in our people by improving their knowledge and their skills. I will use my experience in local government to ensure that legislation allows local authorities to invest, to save, and to think much more long-term. Both things I consider to be in the best interests of council taxpayers. I will try to ensure that this government's approach to devolution is the one that will genuinely pass power to local communities, who I think are best placed to know what their areas need, and work in the best interests of my constituents. And finally, I hope to continue the cross-party working that I have enjoyed with representatives from across Kent and the South East, so that our region grows and prospers under this government. We face significant challenges in our region, infrastructure, transport and border issues alone, and these cannot be resolved solely within our distinct geographical areas. My politics is underpinned by collaboration and cooperation, and I know that by working together we can deliver the regional economic growth that is needed to drive so much of what we want to achieve. Well-run public services, decent and affordable housing, and better life chances for all. Thank you.
Fred Thomas to make his maiden speech.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to talk to you about Plymouth, but can I first just take a second to celebrate the amazing speeches we've heard this afternoon and also pay tribute to the wealth of experience and passion, not just on these benches, but across the chamber as well. It's really heartening. I think of all the speeches we've heard, the Honourable Friend for Rother Valley spoke about the spirit that we've all seen in our communities where we represent and the confidence he has in that spirit to overcome some of the challenges we're facing as a nation and in our communities, and I completely share that. But let me now talk about Plymouth, the city that I call home, the city I'm so proud to represent in this place as the member for Plymouth Moorview. I want to tell you about our people, our institutions, our rolling hills, about grey warships glinting in the south coast sun, about the noise that 43,000 Argyle fans make on a match day. I want to tell you about the gritty determination of staff at one of the biggest hospitals in this country. But I want to tell you about hope. I'm going to frame this with two principles I lived by during my time in the Royal Marines, principles that are well known amongst our armed forces community in Plymouth. Firstly, that a leader must be a dealer of hope. Because when the chips are down, leaders have to step forward and give hope. And I believe that that is our job in Parliament as well. But, Madam Chair, in Plymouth, communities come together to give each other hope. There is immense strength and resilience in the streets, the housing estates, the front rooms, wherever folks get together and organise to change lives that they and their neighbours are living. Simple, tangible changes made by addressing the needs in front of them, such as Whitley Big Local, the Four Greens Community Trust, Connecting Youth CIC, just to name a few. They all work in partnership with the local community to improve the things that matter, to bring hope. And I want to use my position here to empower our community to effect change and generate hope that life will get better, that families can be lifted out of poverty. Because today, relative child poverty in Plymouth Moorview is at 23%, set against a regional figure of 17%, and I will not accept rising child poverty. Because the second principle that I live by, and I believe a lot of us would share, the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. Meaning if you see something you know is wrong and you keep walking, you are effectively saying you are happy with that situation. The harder option is not to walk past, but to take action. Our hospital in Plymouth, Derriford, serves almost 2 million people across Devon and Cornwall. And I've met with the nurses, the paramedics, doctors, volunteers who do fantastic work under immense pressure. These are people who do not just walk past. But the hospital's up against it, and in June alone there were 5,000 instances where a patient waited more than 4 hours in A&E. That represents a series of personal tragedies for the patients affected. With the new government, I will work tirelessly to change this story. Away from the hospital, the beating heart of our city is Plymouth Argyle Football Club, who are in their second season now in the Championship, making them one of the top clubs in the English Football League. And yet in Plymouth, many families struggle to afford access to sport for their kids. I'm a keen footballer myself, and I believe in the power of sport to set young people up for life. I will use my platform to improve access to sport in Plymouth, because a standard where this country has the finest football leagues watched the world over, but where our own youngsters can't afford to play, is not a standard that I will walk past. I pay tribute to the excellent work of the Argyle Community Trust and the Plymouth Football Boot Bank, who do incredible work to broaden access to sport in Plymouth already. Madam Chair, as a former Royal Marines Commando, it's a particular privilege to represent the city that's home not only to the largest naval base in Western Europe, but also home to the Royal Marines, who are still headquartered in Plymouth. Ours is a city where so many residents have served in uniform. I want to take this opportunity to thank every single one of them for their service and their dedication, and also to pay tribute to my predecessor for his heartfelt efforts to raise the profile of the veterans' agenda. For centuries, Plymouth has had a proud military history, and the Prime Minister recently called it the front line of defence in the UK. Navy, Marines and Army personnel have deployed from Plymouth for hundreds of years. The tradition of proud military service runs like a stick of rock through our city. And now, as we find ourselves as a country in another moment of critical international instability, Plymouth is again a keystone in protecting our national security. Devonport Dockyard is the home port for the frigates, survey vessels and amphibious shipping that are crucial to our safety. It's also where the submarines that host our nuclear deterrent are maintained and will be for generations to come. We're also home to highly skilled SMEs, such as M-Subs, who make unmanned submersible craft used in the most special military projects, and Barden Ball Bearings, Collins Aerospace, whose cutting-edge engineering is integral to the UK's modern weapons systems. From our military institutions and our manufacturing base to our hospital, our football club and our dockyard, we stand up and we serve in Plymouth. We give a lot to this nation. But for all this, and if I could borrow a phrase from a friend and a constant source of advice, the Honourable Member for Plymouth, Sutton and Devonport, as he says, Plymouth does not get its fair share. I will work tirelessly with the government to change this, because in Labour, we respect service, and ours will be a government of service, a government of hope. For myself, as I served my country before in uniform, so I'll serve my city now in office. And just as I was trained to in the Marines, I will strive to be a dealer of hope. And when it comes to taking action, I will remember, along with colleagues on this side and that side of the House, that the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Maiden speech, Lucy Rigby.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to start by paying tribute to the Honourable Member for Plymouth Moorview on his fantastic maiden speech, and indeed to pay tribute to all the Honourable Members who've made such brilliant maiden speeches in this afternoon's debate. It's a privilege to follow them and to make my own maiden speech in the context of such an important piece of legislation. Madam Chair, Northampton has been sending members to Parliament since 1283, and it's the honour of my life to be amongst them as the Member of Parliament for Northampton North. One of those former members, I'm proud to say, was the trailblazing Margaret Bomfield, the first woman to serve in Cabinet in this country, the first to be appointed to the Privy Council, and the first to chair the TUC. And Madam Chair, I hope, in the course of my time here, that we might find ways to see Margaret's name given greater recognition and prominence, as I believe is due. 51 years after Margaret Bomfield's arrival in this House, the good people of my constituency elected Maureen Colquhoun, a trailblazer herself in relation to many issues, including as the country's first openly gay MP. But, Madam Chair, I want to pay particular tribute to my two immediate predecessors, Sir Michael Ellis and Sally Keeble. Sir Michael stepped down at the last election, having served Northampton North for 14 years and serving the country as a minister in multiple roles. He's also remembered locally for performing life-saving CPR on a constituent having a coronary episode, which I'm more than aware sets me a very, very high bar for the purposes of looking after my constituents. Like Sir Michael, Labour's Sally Keeble also served Northampton North for well over a decade, and her country in government too. Sally has many achievements, but notable amongst them was the taking through of one of the last pieces of legislation of the previous Labour government to protect developing countries from vulture funds. Sally remains a dedicated and a committed public servant. I don't mind admitting that I spoke to plenty of residents during the election campaign who told me that whilst they really appreciated my doorstep pitch for their support, they would be voting for Sally Keeble. Madam Chair, I'm aware of the examples of good service in this place that have been set for me, and I hope to live up to them. So I want my constituents to know serving our community in Northampton will be my first and my highest priority for as long as I remain in this place. Which leads me to say, Madam Chair, that this place could in fact be in my constituency, because Northampton has been the seat of Parliament on more than 30 occasions, and King John even moved the Treasury to Northampton in 1205 when he fell out with a few people in London over something akin to a disastrous mini-budget. An option which I suspect those supportive of the Treasury's current location will be glad to know was not suggested, as far as we know, to the former member for South West Norfolk. Madam Chair, we're a town of deep pride, both in our present and in our past. We're the largest town in England. We have buildings of neo-Gothic splendour, strong communities, beautiful green spaces, Eastfield Park, Abington Park, the racecourse, not one but two shoe armies, the Premiership champions, Northampton Saints, and the mighty Cobblers too. Our boot and shoemaking industry has provided many members of this House with their footwear over the years, including, I'm proud to say, the former Prime Minister and member for Sedgefield, who wore the same pair of lucky Churches of Northampton brogues every PMQs for a 10-year period, which I think just goes to show where a good pair of Northampton shoes can get you. Madam Chair, service is something that runs deep in my family. My mum worked for the NHS and the MOD. My dad served in the Royal Engineers for 30 years, including in the First Gulf War and in the Balkan conflict. I was born on RAF Bedburg in Germany, and I grew up, like many forces children, on military bases all over the place. I learned the true value of service, acquired a continuing and personal respect for the dedication of our armed forces, and a deep patriotism, not for its own sake, but rather a commitment to our British values of the rule of law, democracy, tolerance, and liberty. That strong sense of fairness led me to train as a lawyer. And so 13 years after my dad served on the NATO deployment in Bosnia, I went out to The Hague to be part of the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, the body established to bring some semblance of justice to bear following that conflict. I will never forget the testimony of witnesses to the most appalling of crimes against humanity. And that experience showed me not only the importance of the international community, but the value of justice being done. These are principles which I think are particularly important in the context of Russia's aggression in the Ukraine and the Ukrainian people's brave fight for freedom. Madam Chair, my career as a solicitor has allowed me rich and varied experience for which I am very grateful. I specialised in competition law and spent time in the city, at the regulator and at Which, giving me particular insight into how markets work, how regulation works, and indeed can work better for consumers, businesses and the country as a whole. And Madam Chair, given the serious ongoing pressures on living standards and family budgets in my constituency and the challenges in our wider economy, the present government's focus on these issues is extremely welcome. This budget responsibility bill is so vital precisely because it will guard against the recklessness which unfortunately caused so many of my constituents in Northampton North so much financial pain and additional hardship. So, Madam Chair, it's an extraordinary privilege to represent Northampton North in this place, and it is an honour which I will continually endeavour to live up to for as long as I'm here.
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship this afternoon. Can I start by congratulating my honourable friends and other honourable members for delivering their maiden speeches. It's been a pleasure to be in the chamber this afternoon to hear them, and it's very clear that they will all be great champions for their constituencies. I will now take a few moments to remind the House why we are taking forward the important clauses in this bill and set out the government's views on the proposed amendments. At the general election, the government received a mandate for economic growth. This is the only route to improve prosperity and is now our national mission. One of the crucial first steps to achieve this is to deliver economic stability. We have seen what happens without stability, like during the 2022 Conservative mini-budget, when huge unfunded fiscal commitments were made without proper scrutiny, and when key economic institutions like the Office of Budget Responsibility, the OBR, were sidelined. That is why we have made a commitment in our manifesto for a fiscal lock, to strengthen the role of the OBR, and why we have taken quick action to deliver on this commitment. This will reinforce credibility and trust by preventing large-scale unfunded commitments that are not subject to an independent fiscal assessment. It proves that this is a responsible government which will not play fast and loose with the public finances like the last did. The Budget Responsibility Bill, the detail of which we are debating today, sets out the legal framework for the operation of the fiscal lock and builds on the Budget Responsibility and National Audit Act of 2011. In line with that established legal framework, some of the technical detail underpinning the fiscal lock will be set out by an upcoming update to the Charter for Budget Responsibility, a draft of which the Treasury has published to support scrutiny of the bill today. I will now talk through the two specific clauses in the bill. The first clause is the main substantive clause setting out the operation of the fiscal lock. It introduces a new clause, 4A, into Part 1 of the Budget Responsibility and National Audit Act, which relates to budget responsibility and which was used to legally establish the OBR. There are 5 key changes. First, the new subsection 1 of Clause 4A guarantees in law that from now on, every fiscally significant change to tax and spending will be subject to scrutiny by the independent OBR. Subsection 1 will require that before a government minister makes any fiscally significant announcement to Parliament, the Treasury always requests that the OBR prepares an economic and fiscal forecast. This builds on existing legal frameworks requiring the OBR to produce at least 2 forecasts per year, and importantly, the OBR's assessment should include the extent to which the government is meeting its fiscal mandate. This requirement applies when 2 or more announcements are made where the combination of measures is fiscally significant, irrespective of whether the measures are announced at the same time. It will also apply separately to costs and savings so that those cannot be offset against each other. Second, the new subsection 2 strengthens the role of the OBR by requiring them to produce an independent assessment if they judge the fiscal lock has been triggered. If a fiscally significant announcement is made without the Treasury having previously requested a forecast, the OBR is required to inform the Treasury Committee of this House of its opinion, and to then prepare an assessment as soon as is practicable. Third, the new subsection 3 defines a measure or combination of measures as fiscally significant if they exceed a specified percentage of GDP. In line with the existing legal framework, the precise threshold will be set via an update to the Charter for Budget Responsibility, a draft of which will be published on gov.uk. The threshold level itself will be set out at announcement of at least 1% of nominal GDP in the latest forecast. As an example, this year the 1% threshold would be £28 billion. Fourth, the new subsection 4 ensures proper scrutiny of the government's fiscal plans without preventing the government from responding to emergencies such as the COVID-19 pandemic. It sets out that the fiscal lock does not apply in respect of measures that are intended to have a temporary effect and which are in response to an emergency. The Charter will define temporary as any measure that is intended to end within 2 years. To safeguard against this subsection being used to avoid proper scrutiny, as set out in the updated Charter, the OBR will have the discretion to trigger the fiscal lock and to prepare a report if it reasonably disagrees. Fifth, and finally, the new subsection 6 prevents any future government from choosing to ignore the fiscal lock by simply updating the Charter for Budget Responsibility alongside a fiscally significant announcement. It achieves this by requiring the government to publish any updates to the detail of the fiscal lock, such as the threshold level at which it is triggered, at least 28 days before the updated Charter is laid in Parliament. Clause 2 of the bill sets out when it will come into force and whom it applies. Subsection 1 of Clause 2 confirms that this deals with reserved or accepted matters, and its provisions extend and therefore apply to England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. The new subsections 2 and 3 allow for the commencement of legislation to occur at the appropriate time as is usual practice, and we expect this will take place ahead of the upcoming budget on October 30th. I will now turn to the amendments which Right Honourable and Honourable Members have tabled. Briefly, yes.
Thank you. I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. Isn't this bill, the intention of this bill, designed to prevent the recklessness of the previous Tory government, which effectively crashed the economy, leaving this new Labour government with a responsibility of putting things right?
My honourable friend has hit the nail on the head, and indeed I might go as far as to say was one of the reasons we achieved such a large mandate at the last general election with so many honourable friends here on this side of the House. We will never play fast and loose with the economy as members on that side did, and this bill will prevent that from happening again in the future. Moving to the amendments, starting with Amendments 9 and 10 tabled by the Shadow Chancellor, this would require the OBR to publish a report whenever HMT announces new fiscal rules. The purpose of this bill is to ensure that no government can make large-scale announcements of tax and spending without being subject to the independent assessment. The government's robust fiscal rules will support economic stability, but do not change tax and spending. It is those decisions that matter, as we saw when the previous Conservative government decided to announce £45 billion of unfunded commitments in the 2022 mini-budget. Very briefly, yes.
Thank you. Thank you for giving way. He can answer this very briefly as well, which is, could the honourable member confirm that he has no plans to change the fiscal rules?
The honourable gentleman is enjoying himself but knows the answer. Wait for the budget. Those amendments, the amendments from the official opposition are therefore not necessary to the bill today. And to answer the Shadow Minister's question, as I've been invited to do so, the Chancellor has already confirmed that this government will set out the precise detail of its fiscal rules at the budget on the 30th of October, alongside an updated OBR forecast. Turning now to Amendments 6 and 7 tabled by my honourable friend, the member for Walthamstow. These focus on the definition of fiscally significant measures to which the fiscal lock will apply. Amendments 6 and 7 would extend the definition of fiscal significance to include measures which would have a cumulative impact on public sector net debt or contingent liabilities. I welcome my honourable friend for highlighting this issue, which I know she has worked on for many years. The draft charter text states measures trigger the lock when the combined costing is at least 1% of GDP in any year. Specifically that, and I quote, the costing of a measure is the direct impact of a policy decision on public finances. It is difficult to set and interpret a threshold consistently for contingent liabilities, as they can often be large in terms of maximum exposure, but low in terms of expected or reasonable worst-case losses. Effective management of contingent liabilities is important, and transparency is key to good fiscal management. The government plans to announce new significant contingent liabilities at fiscal events to make sure that there is transparency with Parliament. We will, of course, continue to notify Parliament of new contingent liabilities as set out in managing public money. The amendments also place a condition on policies with a cumulative impact on public sector net debt, where you have a noted public-private partnerships as an example, referring, of course, to PFI and PF2 models, which the previous government no longer proceeded with, and there has been no change to this policy. As the Chancellor said in her May's lecture earlier this year, we will also report on wider measures of public sector assets and liabilities at fiscal events to ensure transparency across the whole balance sheet, which includes non-debt liabilities. Reporting transparently on the government's stock of contingent liabilities is key to ensuring we do not take excessive risk, and I can therefore confirm today that the government will publish a report on its contingent liabilities. I expect the contingent liability central capability to do this in early 2025. Having said all of that, I recognise the issues my honourable friend raises, and I will arrange to meet with her to discuss them further. Moving to amendments from the Liberal Democrats. Moving to Amendment 2, tabled by the Honourable Member for Richmond Park. As she said, this would enable the OBR to notify the independent advisor on ministers' interests if the fiscal lock is triggered. I'd remind honourable members that the purpose of this legislation is to ensure that never again do we find ourselves in a situation like at the 2022 Liz Truss mini-budget, in which fiscally significant measures are announced without accompanying OBR analysis. If a future government were to act in this way, this legislation provides a clear remedy. The OBR is empowered to independently notify the Treasury Select Committee and to produce its own report. This would be available for full scrutiny by stakeholders and Parliament, who would be able to hold ministers to account in the normal way. We therefore do not consider this amendment to be necessary. Other amendments from honourable members from the front bench of the Liberal Democrats. Amendment 1 would broaden the definition of fiscally significant measures to cover anything which is likely to have an impact on the cost of government borrowing, interest rates or economic growth. The bill is focused on preventing irresponsible large-scale fiscal announcements that could undermine macroeconomic stability, such as the previous mini-budget. To support this, we need to have clear and robust legal frameworks which ensures that the provisions are only triggered when appropriate. This requires precise definitions that everyone, including in particular the OBR, can understand clearly and work with practically. It would therefore not be helpful in the government's view to have a broader, vaguer definition that might or might not repeatedly trigger the fiscal lock under many different circumstances. Amendments 3 and 4 require the Treasury to consult with the OBR and the Treasury Committee before the Charter can be updated for the purposes of the fiscal lock, and to publish a report on the outcome of any such consultations. It is, of course, important that the views of the OBR and of Parliament are taken into account when making changes to the Charter, but I hope the honourable member will accept that it will not be necessary to set this specific process out in primary legislation. That's because this bill already includes an important safeguard on the fiscal lock, the requirement that any changes to the Charter for Budget Responsibility are published in draft at least 28 days before they are laid in the Commons. That will ensure that the OBR, the Treasury Select Committee, this Parliament and all stakeholders will have a clear opportunity to make representations to the Treasury and to publish their views as they see fit. Lastly, moving to the amendment from the Green Party. Amendment 5, tabled by the Honourable Member for North Herefordshire, would require the OBR to take net zero targets into account when preparing a report on fiscally significant announcements. There are strong legal frameworks in place already through the Climate Change Act of 2008 to support the transition to net zero in 2050, which legislates for interim 5-year carbon budgets and requires the government to report on these periodically. Parliament and its select committees already scrutinised that in great detail. I would also point to the fact that the Green Book, the Treasury's guidance on how to appraise policies, projects and programmes, requires departments to assess the climate and environmental impacts of policy proposals, with major bids and proposals at fiscal events being assessed accordingly in this way. We therefore do not consider this amendment to be necessary. I shall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Would the Minister not agree with me that having committed to give a net zero mandate to all relevant regulators, that the OBR is indeed a highly relevant regulator?
And equipped to do the job it's supposed to do alongside the other regulatory body that holds the government to account, the Committee on Climate Change. In conclusion, Madam Chair, I hope I've been able to provide some assurances such that honourable members will be content to retract their proposed amendments. If not, I urge the House to reject them. I should also say thank you to other members for their contributions to the debate today. In response to the Honourable Member for Arundel and South Downs, I would maybe gently invite him to reflect on his own party's record in crashing the economy through unfunded tax cuts, losing control of public spending and ruining family finances before offering advice to this government on fiscal responsibility. And may I say to the spokesperson from the SNP, who's not in his place, I was quite surprised to see so many discredited Conservative Party lines to take in his speech. Who knew the SNP and the Tory Party were one and the same thing? With this Labour government, Madam Chair, our commitment to fiscal discipline and sound money is the bedrock of all of our plans. To conclude, these clauses guarantee in law that from now on, every fiscally significant change to tax and spending will be subject to scrutiny by the independent OBR. They deliver on a key manifesto commitment to provide economic stability and sound public finances by strengthening the role of the independent OBR. This is a crucial first step to achieve sustained economic growth. I commend the clauses and the bill to the House.
Shadow Minister Nigel Huddleston.
Thank you, Chair. I won't detain the House too long by repeating the arguments I made in my opening comments. I would like to say, though, I am disappointed by the Minister's response, in particular his refusal to accept our amendment. It is quite alarming that he's refusing to do so because, as I outlined, I believe that they are very consistent with the goals of the overall bill. And I think that this bill will be seriously undermined, the credibility of this bill will be seriously undermined if it does not include the fiscal rules, and if they're not included. And I like the Minister a lot. We go back a way, we've always had civil conversations. But if the Minister does not believe or consider the level of debt, type of debt and the definition of debt to be quote-unquote fiscally significant, then with the greatest respect, perhaps the Treasury is not the right home for him. They are transparently fiscally significant and important part of the consideration that we're talking about today.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way and for inviting me to suggest whether I should try to find a job in another department. I would just point out that having arrived at the Treasury, I did see the impact of fiscally significant levels of debt after 14 years of the Conservative government. Has he got anything to say to the House on that matter?
Yes, I have indeed, because as I outlined in my original statement, the arguments the Honourable Member is making do not stack up with the facts. The economic circumstances they have inherited are better in many areas than we inherited from them back in 2010. The economy is the fastest growing in the G7. Unemployment, which, by the way, every Labour government since the Second World War has increased unemployment while they're in power for us to then clear it up and reduce unemployment when we take over. Inflation was lower when they took power than it was that we inherited on all of these measures, and debt, annual debt as well, was higher when we took over in 2010. So they keep saying all of these things. The challenging thing is it just doesn't stack up with the facts. Their arguments about the level of debt, as I outlined again earlier on, they have already announced £10 billion for inflation-busting salary increases for their union mates, £8 billion on their energy provisions, and £7 billion on the National Wealth Fund. That's £25 billion of additional money that they have spent. If there is a black hole in the finances, it is so clearly one of their own making by the announcements they've made since coming into government. £25 billion is a huge amount of money. But I will finish those points because we had this debate earlier on, and we'll come to that. I won't give way at the moment because I now want to move on to some more positive things. We've got third reading as well, so let's enjoy ourselves here. But I say, just because the opposition keep repeating this narrative does not make it true. I'm sure they'll continue to do so, but I would say £25 billion, I've just outlined, of £25 billion of additional spending, that is a choice that they have made. That is a choice that they have made. And as I also outlined earlier on, the arguments that they are having to now, out of response to the circumstances that they inherited, out of response to that, cut pensions, payments to pensioners, again is not true, because as I outlined in my opening speech, that was a deliberate policy choice, a long-stated policy choice, articulated by the current Chancellor a decade ago. That is not a response to circumstances. That was deliberate Labour policy. But as I said, on a more positive note, I would like to congratulate all of those who've made their maiden speeches today. the MPs for Loughborough, Portsmouth North, Swindon North, Chelmsford, Southend East and Rochford, Woking, Rother Valley, Wokingham, Dudley, Rochester and Stroud, Plymouth Moorview and Northampton North. They have made incredible contributions today. The breadth of experience that they bring to this Parliament is astounding, and I'm largely talking here about opposition members, and I would say that with a great degree of respect, because in many circumstances, in fact nearly every single circumstance, you have replaced good friends of mine who contributed significantly to this House. You all have, quite big shoes to fill, but what was said today was very impressive. We also, in particular, those of you who spoke without notes, that's a lesson to all of us. I would also like to say what a beautiful kind of tour we had around the United Kingdom. Everybody who spoke today spoke eloquently about their constituencies, about their constituents, the rich heritage, the rich history that was showcased today was incredibly impressive as well, and their constituents, I'm sure, will be very proud of what they have said. So with that, Madam Chair, I will finish my comments, but the debate, I'm sure, will continue.
The question is that Amendment 9 be made. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No! I think the noes have it. The noes have it. You want to shout a bit? You're meant to be shouting again. No, thank you. Division, clear the lobby. Amendment 9, as on the order paper, be made. As many are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Tellers for the ayes are Paul Holmes and Stuart Anderson. Tellers for the noes are Gerald Jones and Keir Mather.
The ayes to the right, 109. The noes to the left, 366.
The ayes were 109. The noes were 366. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock. Right, where do you go? We now come to Amendment 2 to Clause 1, which has been selected for separate decision. I call Sarah Olney to move the amendment formally.
Formally.
The question is that the Amendment 2 be made. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. I think the noes have it. The noes have it. Aye. Division. As on the order paper, as many as that opinion say aye, of the contrary, no. Tellers for the ayes are Vera Hobhouse and Sarah Green. Tellers for the noes, Gerald Jones and Keir Mather. You should all be.
ayes to the right, 73. The noes to the left, 375.
The ayes to the right were 73 and the noes to the left were 375. The noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock. With the leave of the House, I shall put the question on clauses 1 and 2 together. The question is that clause 1 and clause 2 stand apart. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. The question is that I do report the bill without amendment to the House. The question is that I do report the bill to the House. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. Order. Whip to report.
I beg to report that the committee has gone through the bill and directed me to report the same without amendments.
The question is that the bill now be read a third time. Minister to move.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I beg to move that the bill be read a third time. I will not take up too much more time in the House this evening. Let me just provide a final reminder of how important this legislation is. At the general election, the government received a mandate for economic growth. Sustained growth is the only route to improve prosperity and to improve the living standards of the British people. It is now our national mission. In order to achieve this, economic stability is key. We have seen what happens without it. When huge unfunded fiscal commitments are made without proper scrutiny, and when key economic institutions like the OBR are sidelined, we cannot let ourselves get into that position again. Unfunded, unassessed spending commitments don't just threaten the public finances, they can threaten people's incomes and people's mortgages, as we have seen from the period in office before the election from members opposite. And so I would encourage Right Honourable and Honourable members opposite who tell us today that we have had an economy never so good after 14 years of Conservative government to reflect, if only for a moment, on why they lost all credibility for economic competence and suffered their worst election result in their history. Before I conclude, can I once again congratulate all of my honourable friends and other honourable members for their excellent maiden speeches today. I would like to thank honourable and right honourable members from across the House for their contributions to the debates, and of course to House clerks and officials who have supported the bill's rapid passage. The Budget Responsibility Bill forms a small but vital part for our plan to restore economic stability and deliver economic growth. For these reasons, I commend it to the House.
The question is that the bill be now read the third time, and I call Shadow Minister Alan Mack.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I begin by thanking everybody who has contributed to the debate on this bill, both today and before the summer recess, especially new members who have made their maiden speeches. The honourable members for Loughborough, Portsmouth North, Swindon North, Chelmsford, Southend and Rochford, Woking, Rother Valley, Wokingham, Dudley, Rochester and Stroud, Plymouth Moorview and Northampton North. They all spoke incredibly well with passion and eloquence, and we wish them well for their time in the House. Madam Deputy Speaker, we Conservatives believe in sound public finances, fiscal responsibility and independent forecasts as the foundation of economic stability. That is why it was a Conservative government that created the OBR in the first place over a decade ago, and it's why today we tabled our amendment to improve the bill and stop Labour moving the goalposts on the fiscal rules. By voting against our sensible proposal, Labour have shown they're just not serious about our public finances. What is it they are trying to hide? Madam Deputy Speaker, it is clear that the purpose of this bill is actually designed to distract everyone from Labour's economic record and pave the way for tax rises in the autumn budget. Madam Deputy Speaker, let us examine Labour's economic record. They've been in government for just 9 weeks and already carried out 9 acts of economic vandalism. They've removed the winter fuel allowance from 10 million pensioners despite promising not to, caved into their union paymasters by agreeing inflation-busting pay rises, failed to commit to investing 2.5% of our national income on defence, cancelled vital infrastructure upgrades on the A27 and A303, cut funding for the vaccine manufacturing plant that would protect our health, imposed Whitehall diktats to concrete over our green spaces, stopped Conservative plans to build 40 new hospitals, scrapped funding for a next-generation supercomputer, undermining our status as a tech superpower, and appointed Labour donors to senior civil service jobs without open competition. 9 weeks, 9 acts of economic vandalism. Madam Deputy Speaker, we know there's more harm to come, with Labour's autumn budget set to raise taxes. During the election campaign, Labour promised over 50 times not to raise people's taxes, and now they're planning to do just that. It will be hard-working people, pensioners and businesses who will pay the price. So can I invite the Chief Secretary to get to his feet to rule out raising taxes on working people such as drivers, savers and business owners? And will he rule out, at the same time, changing the fiscal rules to allow for more government borrowing and debt? Is the Chief Secretary coming to the threat march?
I always welcome the opportunity to return to the dispatch box, and so I thank the Shadow Minister for inviting me. Might I just say, the opposition provides an opportunity for reflection. Whilst he is offering his thoughts on our 2 months in office, which I think, to say, might be 2 months to the great relief of the British people, does he have anything to say about his 14 years in office before the election?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think the answer from the Chief Secretary was no, and it confirms everything that we all knew. And it means that the people can never trust Labour with our economy. It means Labour will raise taxes and cut investment at every opportunity. And it means that their honeymoon is well and truly over.
The question is that the bill be now read the 3rd time. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Motion on House of Commons Commission. Leader of the House to move.
Move formally.
The question is as on the order paper. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.